Noon into Circle City. On a beautiful day, that means it is time for the Midday Show here on The Fan. Coming to you from the DriveHuler.com studios, I'm Will Haskett. That's Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison here's going to get through all of the traffic really fast. IU head football coach Tom Allen at 12:30. Evan Sidery at 1 o'clock to talk NBA hoops. Aaron Wilson down in Houston at 2 o'clock. We're going to talk about the rumblings around the second pick. But I'm getting right into it because this is an audio medium. And you two fine gentlemen, Jimmy, Eddie Garrison's over there making this sound good. We're just in a minor physical altercation a moment ago, trying to, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, go through the physical evidence of defending or prosecuting Draymond Green and his actions on Domantas Sabonis the other night. Gentlemen, have we worked things out, or do we need to seek mediation on this debate? Because you actually reenacted the scene of the crime. I didn't think we'd get on the air in time to make this show happen today, but here we are. Are we okay?
I think we are. Are we good?
I think we're good, yeah, for now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily changed
Until
Eddie's
you grab
opinion.
my foot, yeah, we're good.
To bring it up to speed, Draymond Green last night, it was announced by the NBA late last night that he'd been suspended 1 game without pay for stepping on the chest of Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. Suspension was also based in part to Green's history of unsportsmanlike acts. Eddie made the argument, like a lot of people have, like a lot of either NBA fans or Draymond fans or just whatever. Like people in general that have opinions on this have said, well, if Sabonis doesn't grab him by the ankle, then this thing never happens. And I said, okay, that's fair. And then I went up to Eddie and I kind of like grabbed across his shoulder and I was like, okay, you can do 2 things here. You could push me off or you can clock me in the face.
And since we had a show, I decided not to clock him in the face.
I appreciate that. That's very kind of you.
I can handle this show solo. So if that had happened, we would have figured out a way to do it. The articles have come out. Woj with this about 15 minutes before we came on the air, and you probably heard it prior to the show as well. But in an interview with ESPN, Joe Dumars, who obviously is handling much of the disciplinary stuff, the NBA executive vice president and head of basketball operations, said that it was Green's, quote, excessive and over-the-top actions and his history as a, quote, repeat offender instrumental in his 1-game suspension. This is no different than any other walk of life, any other organization, any other workplace environment. How you treat other people over the course of time will have an impact on discipline or long-term ramifications. If it's a first-time offense in this situation for Draymond Green, he gets handled differently. I think it's fair to look at people. We've had this discussion on a number of prominent sports figures in this market in terms of how you treat people within the organization or within the building will give you a longer leash in your employment. It's okay to utilize past history in terms of passing down judgment in an isolated incident that this was in Game 2 of this playoff series. By the way, a playoff series where I think Golden State's done after that loss, and now a 1-game suspension for Draymond Green, who is sort of the glue that you unwillingly, in many respects, suffer through to keep your sort of team together. And this is going to hang as a black cloud as this series returns to California coming up, tomorrow, right? For Game 3.
There's no tinfoil hat to really defend it, right? Because if this was, let's just say for the sake of argument, Warriors-Lakers instead, you'd be like, it's the league benefiting LeBron. It's benefiting L.A., one of their top teams in general, even though the Warriors are right there, but that would be the hat that was worn. This is the Kings. Sacramento Kings, who've been a great story, but this is not a
easy team to shove out of the way if you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, so you're off the board in that regard. And, look, I said this to Eddie as well. I agree that it probably doesn't happen if Sabonis doesn't grab him by the ankle, but the response didn't have to be stomp on his chest. Didn't need to break that out. He landed on him once, and then he goes down again with force. Didn't need to do it. Second thing for me, and I think it was Kenny the Jet Smith last night on Inside the NBA after the night wrapped up, put it very eloquently in terms of the whole history thing. If you're speeding all the time and getting pulled over speeding, you're going to add points to your license. Yes. At some point, it's no longer, hey, here's just a quick ticket. At some point, it's, okay, get out of the car. We're done here.
Yes.
You're not driving anymore.
And I will defend competitive fire, heat of the moment situations for any athlete that is out there. I think that slow motion replay has hurt a lot of what happens in terms of bang bang moments of plays. Intentional elbows or swinging of arms or things that happen can look oftentimes way worse in slow motion when the referees in New York has to go to those replays and look at it and say, is it a flagrant 1 or a flagrant 2? But the person who committed the act in this situation matters. It has to matter. It matters, as you mentioned, in real life. This is real life. It just happens to be that this this place of employment is a professional sports organization that is under the microscope more than any at this particular moment because it happens to be the playoffs. So you have to act in that way, and this action will have consequences for Golden State moving forward. And I said it, I was here on Monday, I thought that the Warriors would get that game done. I thought that it was an opportunity for them to bounce back. It was a really entertaining basketball game. I'm not necessarily sure that moment has any outcome on the game where it came in that second half. I think that the Kings had shown, and good on them. I mean, Sacramento is just a great story. They're fun to watch, and they match up really well against the Warriors. The deeper I get into this series, and we talked a lot about Sabonis on Monday and not allowing the success of the Kings to look back retroactively at the trade last summer with the Indiana Pacers. Sabonis, without really anybody to fight him or push him from the Warriors. I mean, Looney doesn't scare me. Who scares you if you're Domantas Sabonis on the Warriors down low? And it's enabled his freedom of movement, obviously the brilliance that is De'Aaron Fox. I think it's a perfect matchup for them, and I think they're going to handle them. I think they're going to handle the Warriors in this series. It completely changed my entire perspective. I love the concept of the Warriors in the postseason, but it's rinse and repeat. It's, Draymond's in trouble. It's a bad matchup. Get on the bandwagon, folks, because the Kings, I think, are going to the Western Conference semis.
Yeah, I finally got the monkey off my back in terms of bets with Eddie. I lost 4 straight.
Thanks
back to Kings that time.
Thanks for the Clay stuff. The 5 or over threes. Yep. Parlayed that with my under. Remember I said take the under in that game?
Yep.
And I wanted some juice. Parlayed it together. Monday was a good payday.
Yeah, this thing's done for me. Like I'm not saying the Warriors can't go get a game because they have been noticeably 2 different teams on the road and at home all season. That's well documented. We don't necessarily need a full in-depth reminder of that. But just the physicality with the way the Kings are playing, and there were moments where Draymond gets tossed in game 2, and you have Klay Thompson all of a sudden go in bleep you mode and starts knocking down a couple threes, and it's like, okay, maybe this is the wave.
Sure.
Like, this is the response.
Yep.
This is the inevitable punchback from the defending champs. They outlasted it. They held serve. It would really surprise me, and this is not something I would have said to start the series, it would really surprise me at this point if we're talking in a week and a half's time and the Warriors have won in 7.
Can we also put to bed the 11-year cloud of the 2012 draft that always seemed to hang over this market of, who's available? We could have taken Draymond Green late in the first round, as if you would have, A, projected what he was going to be forward, B, would have put him on a roster here that would have allowed him to do what he's done over the last 11 years of his career, and C, if this is truly who he is through that time, how much we would have been like, man, really, this is our guy? Are we fully forgiven at this point in time after another
that's a
demerit?
That's a badge the whole league's going to wear forever. Everybody that passed on him, like I'm still not ready to bury it. I mean, he's like, does
a perfect roster for him to fall into.
Does he have the success that he has in Gold or anywhere else than Golden State? I'm not certain. He is certainly not, because I've been saying it since they went back to back, just projecting out the way the NBA goes, or not back to back when they won 2 of 3. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, and he is guaranteed now at this point based on just the on-court success they've had. The NBA is one of the easier Hall of Fames to get into. He is a critical face of this era of Warriors basketball, albeit behind Klay and Steph. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Would he have achieved that type of success anywhere else? I don't think so, but I think he still would have been a damn good player, and
it's an interesting discussion. I need more time to process the Hall of Fame argument numbers here, because when you're thinking about it from a dynasty standpoint, a dynastic team like this one, Curry first ballot, Klay maybe not first ballot, but very quickly after, just in terms of his shooting and prowess. He's the Robin to the Batman in this scenario. They won titles with a first ballot Hall of Famer in Kevin Durant. So that's 3 players off of this dynasty team. When we think of other dynastic teams in the NBA, how many of them do we go for? I mean, you get to go back to the old Celtics before you get, the 80s Lakers are Magic, Kareem, Worthy. Is Worthy in the Hall of Fame? He's in the Hall of Fame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's tougher than you think. I mean, the numbers are great. The all-around numbers and stats are good. The number of rings are good. He's certainly the most Valuable is not the right word. Curry's always the most valuable player on that team. The only argument would be maybe Durant when they were together. Most important player, most irreplaceable. Man, it's hard. I can't give you an M insert letter P role necessarily, but he's the glue guy on that team. But Horace Grant isn't in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm trying to think of the Bulls in the 90s. It's Pippen and Jordan. Later it becomes Rodman's, I guess, the third of that one. And before that, it's Horace Grant. Like, neither one of those guys were just quintessential. They're going to the Hall. How do we arrive here? Like, we're 10 minutes into the show, and now we're having a Draymond Green into the Hall of Fame discussion.
Because you took us down the draft path, and why people should not feel bad for themselves if they passed. I mean, it's
I
tough.
apologize.
Like, it's the same. They're obviously two different players to their sport in terms of what they really did, but you talk about the same thing with, how many teams passed on Aaron Rodgers? In terms of the NBA, at least since I've been alive, that's outside of Steph, who wasn't quite as many spots as Draymond, but had a more Aaron Rodgers-like impact. Yeah. Draymond's the one you think about when you think about modern NBA of, wow, look at how many teams passed on this guy, look what he became.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, there's always that hit that could
probably
happen.
Giannis too, but he wasn't.
Right.
Something.
Well, I mean, how many? I mean, you could go back even farther than that. The guys that were held in Europe. I mean, Dirk Nowitzki should have gone higher than where he was, but you're banking on something that you didn't know was going to happen. In the same vein where Nowitzki was drafted, then you have the overcorrection, and Nicholas Schizavili gets drafted, in the top 5 or 6, thinking that he can develop into that. So, yeah, it's hard to say for those types of players in terms of knowing that you're going to shelve them for a couple of years. But Draymond falling to the second round is interesting, but I don't know if there's a particular spot or team at that moment in time where he has the same sort of impact. I mean, there's very real possibility that if he's picked by 10 of the teams in front of him, in front of the Warriors in that draft, that he's not even in the league anymore. I mean, circumstance sometimes will drive people out of the league if there isn't value and a perception of that. And would there have been a change of scenery if he fell into the right place? These are all hypotheticals that we probably just need to get away from.
You had a bad beat last night.
I had a bad beat last night. Games have gotten incredibly entertaining. We expect more of them tonight. By the way, Lakers-Grizzlies Game 2, you can hear on the Fan, coverage starting at 7 o'clock. That's a 7:30 tip with 3 games tonight. The Celtics could play left-handed, and they're going to beat the Hawks. That's not going to be a problem. They win last night. The Cavs-Knicks series is probably going to go 7.
Charles is right again. I mean, tip the cap to him. He said this is the must-watch series in the East.
Holy cow, it's fun.
Yeah.
Super fun. Yep. Darius Garland, 32 last night. They've got that two-headed beast in the backcourt for that group. That is a really fun series to watch. And then the Suns doing what the Suns should have done last night, taking care of business to tie that series at 1 apiece.
Streak is over.
All right, here we go. Oh, the Scott Foster streak.
It's over.
Yeah.
Pop the champagne. Go ahead.
Chris Paul did not want to engage in that conversation last night, did he? After it was all said and done. Okay.
No jersey swapping.
There was a little parlay thrown right in my direction last night that seemed too good to be true in a game that I knew was going to be high-flying. It was right there in my DraftKings lobby waiting for me when I logged in last night.
It was sportsbook promoted. It wasn't like somebody's game.
No, it was sportsbook promoted.
That's key.
Which I typically always, it's a red flag there. It's like the book knows something that I don't know.
Yes.
But it was a 4-leg parlay just involving Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant last night.
Sure.
It was Leonard and Durant, each of them respectively over 26.5 points, and each of them respectively over, I believe, 5.5 rebounds or 6 rebounds. It was a late game. I will admit I did not stay up for the second half of this game. I watched the first half. Here were their stat lines at the half, each identical, 16 points and 5 rebounds. Comfortably, I go to sleep.
Feed her up.
I wake up this morning, Suns win going away convincingly. I'm like, must have been a good half. Kawhi Leonard finishes with 31 and 8. Kawhi took care of business, although he only grabbed 2 rebounds in the second half. Kevin Durant plays 44 minutes last night, 16 at the half, Jimmy. Finishes with 25 and 6. I lose by a point.
Yeah, and unfortunately what kind of happened
Booker got hot.
Yeah, and they were double-teaming KD, and whenever they doubled KD, it seemed like Booker would just take control and get an open mid-range shot, and Vegas got you.
I was just going to say it was Booker being Booker, because when Booker gets the ball, he doesn't pass much.
He does not.
No.
But in last night's game, he didn't need to pass much. 14 to 22 from the field, 4 of 7 from 3. He goes for 38 last night. The Suns looked the part of the team that you would expect them to be. That series has all the makings of one that will probably go the distance as well. And I'm I'm here for it because the first game, as Eddie and I were talking about on Monday, the first game was ugly basketball. It was bad basketball.
Yep.
There are too many good players on both of those teams to play as bad of an aesthetic game as I thought that was this past weekend. Last night was the different one. Going back to LA, this will be fun to watch. Westbrook's going to do something stupid at some point in time in the next couple of days. It could be stupid awesome. It could be stupid bad. It's like Draymond Green light in that sort of series of what might happen in that one. It's high entertainment right now in the NBA.
Future bet updates. My son's wager that I got in the night of the KD trade, 50 to win 350. It's back live. Update with it. We're creeping up to more positive thoughts, tying the series at a game apiece.
I'm also cashing plenty right now because the Cubs in Oakland is just an offensive train just rolling. So it's just parlay everybody getting hits and scoring runs right now in that one. That's been fun too to make a little bit of scratch. So tonight, Lakers and Grizzlies, that's probably the highlight of the games tonight in that one. 3 games on the docket again in the NBA. I appreciate the fact that even though they're sort of burying a game on NBA TV early or at any point in time during the night, at least we're playing 3 games on weeknights instead of drawing these series out 2 games a night, and you've got 3 days sometimes between games. Let's keep this thing moving. Some interesting ones tonight. Grizzlies in a must-win at home. I have not seen. Have you heard about Ja Morant? What's the news on Ja? I should have probably checked here in the last few moments if we've gotten anything on his status for the game tonight. Heat and Bucks at 9. Timberwolves Nuggets at 10 o'clock tonight.
Last I saw was yesterday, which is not a great sense of optimism. They found out it was soft tissue. It's going to be pain tolerance, basically. Game time decision.
Has to play, doesn't he? I think even if you're out there, his athleticism alone with a bad hand, you're not forcing him to shoot threes. You don't want him stepping back. They're going to sag off of him anyway. You want him out there for hustle, for energy, for moments. I mean, that's a guy I think you roll him through. If this was Steph Curry, if this was, I'm trying to think of the requisite Laker, if this was Austin Reeves, who you need out there for more finesse and shooting, then okay, soft tissue in a hand, okay, I'd stay away from it. But
this is one of those spots where, like, if there's any by chance Grizzlies fans listening, like, they won't like this take, and I get it. I think that Memphis, at its whole, with everybody close to healthy, rightfully so, is the better team. If
they're not healthy.
If he can get to a point where he can shoot comfortably and not have to play through as much pain, or if this is an injury where it's going to be with him the whole series, that's the defining line, right? If it's something where they don't play again until Saturday, if you can sit him one more game and have him for games 3 through, at that point, 6 or 7, and it's guaranteed he's going to get better and it won't get really re-aggravated, don't rush him back. If it's something where it's not getting any better over the course of this series, you play him tonight as long as he can go.
This is a team that's lost 7 games total all year at home when you include the playoff loss. I think there was 6 losses during the regular season for them at home. I just don't think you can afford losing both of them.
I would play him, to be clear.
Yeah,
I would play him, but if...
I understand. There's a lot we don't know.
I don't know the diagnosis on it. Right. If it's, hey, you get 3 more days
know
off
you're going to be better.
You're going to be better the rest of the series, yeah. I would give it serious consideration.
I do. I understand your thought process there. I think that as long as it's manageable and as long as he's not at further risk, and soft tissue typically means, and somewhere Will Carroll can drive off the road when I say this out loud, soft tissue to me typically means, especially in a hand, like you're not at risk of significant further damage. Sure, it could take a hit. Sure, could you strain it a little bit more, whatever it might be, whether it's a strain or a tissue bruise or whatever it might be. But I would say it's probably worth the risk, not being the medical professional and knowing anything that's gone there, to at least just have a go. I think you have to have him on the floor tonight. I don't know if you can risk playing without him tonight and losing the first 2 games at home when being so good at home has been a part of your identity all season long, because now you have to go back and win at least 1 in LA to give yourself a chance at home at pulling out this series over the distance.
A shout out, I'm going to give it because I was hoping someone would have this stat so I wouldn't have to totally scramble for it. Shout out Grizzlies Nation on Twitter for this, because this is exactly the stat I was looking for. With Ja this season, 40-21. Without Ja, 11-10. Without getting too much in the weeds, points per game with him, 117.5. Points per game without him, 115. And that was the narrative when he was banged up or when he departed as well. Like both those things happened this year. When he took his leave of absence was, how does this team respond without him? They played above 500 basketball. I'm not. That would be the argument for if he can get healthy, or if you sit him one more day and he gets till Saturday, if it's guaranteed to be better the rest of the series, that would be an argument for sitting him because they've hung their own and they're so good in that building with or without him.
They played above average basketball in the regular season.
And that's fair
without
point.
him.
That's a fair point.
I think you need to play above average basketball in game 2 of a playoff series without him. Because, again, I don't think it's even above average. You need a win. It is a very black and white evening for the Grizzlies.
Yeah.
You need to win this basketball game. And especially, we talked about matchups. We talked about the Kings and how watching that team play, and we're all sort of learning more and more about Sacramento very fast, and watching now 2 games in that series over the last couple days being like, wow, this is a really good matchup for Sacramento. This is a really good matchup for LA. We saw that in game 1 over the weekend. Their size is a problem right now for this banged-up Memphis team. So it's, sure, can the Lakers have an off? Of course the Lakers can have an off night, but they've got arguably the greatest player, one of the greatest players of all time. Anthony Davis didn't dislocate his arm from its socket, even though we thought it might have happened over the week. So he appears to be
snapped in 2, we thought.
Yeah, that's right. Miraculously healed. He is okay, and his dominance with no one really to check him on the glass, like that's a problem. I would view this differently if I didn't see stretches of that game with or without Ja this past weekend where I was like, oh man, even an older, I guess not older, you have one guy who's old, but even with this Lakers team that has its own warts, it's like, well, yeah, but they can also crash the glass and just dominate on second chance points.
Even without Ja, though, and this is something that the Grizzlies did very, very well, they basically decided, all right, we're going to dare you to beat us from beyond the arc. We're going to have this nice little soft zone look around Anthony Davis. We're going to have bodies all around him. Whether you want to attribute it to the stinger or whether you want to attribute it to the Grizzlies' defensive game plan is our listeners' prerogative. I thought it had a lot to do with what the Grizzlies did defensively, and then all of a sudden Rui Hachimura turns into Reggie and just knocking down everything. And then Austin Reeves, he is him. It just has his massive on stage moment of this is my time. How sustainable is that? Is my larger thing, because you have LeBron and Anthony Davis, but like it also took a near career best effort from both Reeves and Hachimura to make that happen.
Well, let's not forget that, and they won by 16.
Sure.
So it's not like you needed these guys to step up to win you a game late. Like
6 of those points were late dunks, to be fair.
They got everything they needed late from a team that, yes, they made their sort of shots, but the converse to that is they looked good in the Lakers. They looked good in the first half, even though they trailed at the half. And this is in the world without Ja Morant.
Right.
And Ja's energy really, I thought, was the catalyst in keeping that team in that game in the first half and then having the lead. And we haven't talked at all about LeBron. Like, he's going to have 1 or 2 games in this series where he puts on the cape and does LeBron type stuff. They didn't necessarily get it. They didn't need him to be that guy in game 1, and they got it done, which means somewhere deep down he's got to be chuckling a little bit like, oh my gosh, like look at this crew.
Sure.
This crew's, I mean, I got Hachimura and Reeves out here doing this for me.
Sure.
Like, I'll take this possession off. I'll take this possession off. And then when this team really needs me, maybe tonight, then he's able to step it up. Look, this is, you always back the star, right? I mean, when it comes to the NBA playoffs, like
Star-driven league.
Star-driven league, you back the team with the star. You've got the star of his generation on his last couple of trips here, his last couple of chances at it. If you don't have the star on the other side, LeBron knows what tonight means.
Sure.
Like, you go out there and crush hopes and dreams early and try and take control of this series, which is why I think you need that dog on the other side to at least be barking out there and fighting back.
And at minimum, I don't know if it's enough to carry them to a win because it wasn't towards the end. The Lakers did a good job adjusting late, but Jaren Jackson Jr. was that for a large portion of that game. I mean, absolutely
so
insane.
Good.
Like, even Anthony Davis, like, you talk about one of the best big men in the league right now, Jaren Jackson Jr. basically having his moment right now, too.
One of the youngest, or was he the youngest defensive player? It was for local product Jaren Jackson. I think he is the youngest to be named Defensive Player of the Year, if I remember the nugget that I saw come across social media.
I believe you're right.
Which is kind of crazy. I mean, it just goes to show, how young this league is getting, because it feels like Jaren's been in the league now for 15 years, but one and done out of Michigan State, and deservedly so. I don't really think there was a whole lot of debate in that award. We had a lot of fun on the anti-Walker Kessler bandwagon on Monday about looking into who are these 3 finalists for all of these awards. There's some debate in that award. I don't think there was much debate in the Defensive Player of the Year award. Congratulations to him on that one. And we'll see. He'll have to step up tonight. I mean, he was hitting threes in that game on Saturday. I mean, he did a little bit of everything for the Grizzlies, and maybe they get that special moment. Maybe they get the Hachimura Reeves performance from somebody down the line in the second unit to get it done tonight. We shall see. That game coming up your way here on the Fan, 7:30 tip pregame. Starts at 7 o'clock here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. All right, enough NBA. Let's get to some local stuff, shall we? Including the end of spring football is behind us. Some questions maybe down in Bloomington as to how things will shape up coming up in the fall. The man that's going to make all of those questions answered is Tom Allen, head coach. He joins us next. It's the Midday Show with Jimmy Cook. I'm Will Haskett here on our 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Well, Cody was
behind us. Most teams have broken camp. They've had their games. Now the anticipation builds to the fall. That includes all fans in Hoosier Nation getting ready for action at the Rock coming up this fall. And that means there's some tape to go through and some practices to reflect on with our guest. He is the head coach of those Hoosiers. Tom Allen joins us. Coach, congratulations on getting through spring camp. I know it's an exciting time for you and your staff and a chance to sort of calm down and reflect.
Yes, it is. As you mentioned, you get a chance to go back and rewatch the film again. With this time of the year, our coaches are out recruiting as of today. Head coaches don't go out in May. So I spend a lot of time with film. I actually meet with all of our players going through their spring performance and where they feel like they're at and where they want to be, our goals for the summer. So, it's a lot of time of reflection here, evaluating even things from the season during this time of the year. We did a fourth quarter project with our support staff guys, and I'm going to begin working on that in the evenings, and then just do all the recruiting calls and anything that you do to build for your next class. So it's a fun time of year. I love spring football. I'm glad that we had a very productive spring, came out of it healthy, which is a priority, and we got better. So excited for the next phase.
No doubt about that. And I imagine there isn't a coffee shop or Nick's or anywhere down there that you can't walk into where there's a question about that quarterback battle, which I know is going to play out all the way into the fall. And I guess we'll just continue that sort of track. What'd you see out of the two guys, I guess, that are going to be battling for that spot coming up to lead this offense?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, that is the one question that I get everywhere I go, and understandably so. I get it. It's a key position, and so you have Brendan Sorsby and Taven Jackson battling for that spot, and thought they both had a very good spring. Both had made progress. Both are redshirt freshmen, so got some youth to them, without question, high level of talent. In both those guys, I saw their ability to throw it and run it. I just think the knowledge of the system continues to grow for both of them. That's a big part of it. Decision making, and those decisions speed up as you increase your knowledge of the reads and the keys and the anticipation of what you're going to see, where the ball needs to get placed to in the throw game, and then also the decision that they have to make in the run game. So just a continuous process. The next phase is very important. I feel like they both have shown the ability to have strong arms. We obviously get a chance to see that on a daily basis. It's really more decision making and the quickness of those reads and the ability to be accurate with the ball and protecting the ball. I will say both of them, with defensively, we try hard to create takeaways during the spring, and we have a big goal for that, make a big emphasis of that. It was hard for us to get them from them in the air, so that means they did a good job of not putting the ball in danger, so that's a positive thing without question. We work hard to do that, both in disguise as well as attacking the football when it's in there. So I think they have the ability to run it and throw it. That's both their strengths, but now it's a time for them, as we challenge them, to one of them's got to separate, and these next couple months are going to be big for that.
Coach, I want to switch to the other side of the ball. When I look at your most successful teams on defense over your tenure, I look back at 2016, 2019, 2020. Look at how fun those teams were and their ability to create those game-changing turnovers. Is Havoc coming back this year?
It's got to. I mean, it's a huge emphasis. Always has been, always will be. Takeaways, tackling, and effort are the 3 DNA for our defense. That's not changed since the day I got here. But you got to create them, and those plays change games. They change field position. They give you momentum to your offense, to your team, and you're right. In the years when we played our best football, those were at the cornerstone of that. And it's never going to cease to be a priority. Got to create them though, and some of that comes with it's schematic as well. But obviously, a lot of it's just being explosive players that can fly on the football, get their hands on the football, affect the quarterback, force him to make tough throws, force him to make errant throws, hitting while he's throwing, stretch him, pressure him. So no question, it's got to be an area of emphasis, which it is. And like I talked about that in spring ball. So, we live and die by that. And so we got to find ways to create more takeaways.
Indiana head football coach Tom Allen joining us here on the Fan Midday Show. And Coach, college athletics has changed so much in such a quick period of time. And obviously from a basketball standpoint, we're seeing right now the transfer portal and what that means for rosters, and right there in Bloomington in terms of how quickly they can sort of reshape what that is. I'm curious from a spring practice standpoint with new faces coming in, has it changed even in a subtle sort of sense what you have to do in terms of getting players on board compared to maybe spring practices of 5-10 years ago with sort of the transient nature of college athletics now?
Without question. It's caused us to even adapt to our scheme. I feel like you have to simplify. We've changed. We made some schematic changes due to the portal. because of as you mentioned, the transition of the roster, the movement of the roster. Guys are not on your team as long as they used to be. And so you need to be able to have a system that they can pick up in a short amount of time. You still want to maintain the complexity to the opponent, but for your guys' execution and with new faces and getting more guys ready to play sooner has become a priority, and also building your team, and getting them connected sooner because having some new faces in January, they're going to be with you during spring football. And then you also know you got the window just opened on the 15th, got 15 days of that. So you'll have a few new faces that'll be here in the summer that weren't even here in the spring. And so the OTAs we do in June have now become more important, getting those guys indoctrinated. So there's no doubt that the transfer portal has changed everything in a lot of ways, how we do things, and even all the way down to the scheme that we're going to run.
Coach, when you look at former Hoosiers that are getting ready to be a part of the NFL draft next week, how beneficial was the pro day the Colts had just a couple weeks ago for your crew? And then across the board, we look at guys like Cam Jones that are hoping to hear their name called or hoping to be a part of the group of signings that happen after the draft. What stands out to you the most about this group?
Well, you know what? You mentioned it, all those different experiences, the pro day that we have here, the combine, the pro day, the day they have with the Colts, bringing our guys in, those are all interview opportunities for our guys. And I thought we had a great pro day, probably the best one we've had in terms of most number of guys that probably increased their stock. I think that's a big deal, and Cam Jones is probably at the top of that list. He was the one that was at the combine and did so many great things for us here, and Jalen Williams and Tywone Mullen and Monster, those guys all from the defense, and then Luke on offense, and just to be able to get guys an opportunity to get their name called on draft day. So everything matters in that process. They're looking at every little thing. They hire private investigators to research their background and all the things they've done on and off the field. So it all does matter, and that process of getting our guys ready for that is big for them. And so excited to be able to see how it unfolds. You really never know when and how they're going to be picked, and all I tell them is, hey, one team's got to believe in you, whether you get drafted or you get a free agent. We had 6 guys last year, make rosters that went as free agents. So that's a big deal, and so it's also another way to be able to make a team, which at the end of the day, that's the goal.
You mentioned all the little things that those guys have to do to get ready for the next level. There are a lot of little things that your current roster has to do to get ready for kickoff coming up this September. You're not going to be able to have, I guess, direct hands on them from a practice standpoint now for a couple of months. So I'm curious from a coaching and these meetings that you have coming up sort of standpoint, what are the marching orders that you give to these players over the next couple of months, the end of this semester at school, summer for those that are in class? What needs to happen for them to be their best versions of themselves when you kick off against Ohio State in September?
Well, we sit down and map it out. I'm doing that right now. We go through and they have goals for each phase. And right now, the next phase is going to be the month of May. We call it May Matters. It's a discretionary month. They're away from us. They're not required to be here. And so wherever they are, they have to have a great plan. We do a great job with our strength staff, so they'll be given very specific plans to work on. We're having things they're going to work on, a film review, certain drills to do, things that they're going to address, their areas of weakness that they need to be improving on, from a physical perspective. Some may be their diet and how they're going to lean their bodies up to be able to certain body fat percentage goals that they have. So a lot of things that go into that, and we have a specific plan for them, and everybody's a little bit different. But the key is how do they embrace that, how they attack it. Then they come back and they'll be with us in June and July where it is required. And those 8 weeks and those 8 opportunities there, we have OTAs during the month of June with our staff, and our players have to become a big part of their preparation. And then we have player-led practices as well that are also extremely important. And because we can't have a ball out there where they're throwing the football in front of our staff in any months now before before fall camp in August. So a lot of parts that go into that. We have a very specific plan for that, how they watch film, how they do quizzes and do tests over the summertime, and just all different creative ways to hold them accountable to doing the little things that they have to do to be their best come September 2nd.
Coach Tom Allen joining some time with us here on the Fan of the Indiana Hoosiers. Coach, this is year 7 for you overall as the top dog there at IU, 8th in general with the program. When you look back to your first full offseason in 2017 to now, what's been the biggest things that's changed over that time in terms of your process, in terms of the way you take your guys through spring all the way into the summer and into the start of the campaign?
Well, and interestingly, like we've mentioned, that the portal has changed some things, from a schematic perspective, how you maybe simplify some things to make that part different. We've changed the way we practice, since in these last 7 years, not near the live hitting in the spring. We have opportunities for that, but just trying to keep our guys healthy, trying to keep them developing and still building toughness and balancing that out. Used to have more, 150 play scrimmages on a Saturday for 2.5 hours. Don't do those anymore. Really kind of getting more of an NFL model of trying to practice in shells more, stay on our feet. We now have the summer practice. We never used to have those at all, the OTAs in the summer in the month of June, and that's a big difference for us and really a big emphasis. You're just trying to find more creative ways to have development in May, June, and July when you're not technically having a spring practice, with them like you do in March and April. So it's just a never-ending process of how do we make it better. And every year we reevaluate it. Things I don't like, new coaches come in, bring their ideas to be able to enhance it. But it's all about player development. We're a developmental program. We have to be tremendous evaluators of bringing talent here. And then once they get here, we got to be excellent at developing them. That's the weight room. That's the nutrition piece. That's all the things they do when they're away from us. And so that never ends and that never stops. And so we're just trying to find ways to keep getting better at it. And there's no question it's changed a lot in the last 7 years.
And, Coach, in that vein of player development, obviously there's going to be so much of a focus. And we already talked about Brendan Sorsby and Taven Jackson sort of competing for that number one quarterback spot. That's going to be a player of interest for fans coming up this fall. But I want your perspective coming out of spring camp. Give me a name or two of guys that you're excited if they continue on the growth trajectory that they're on, either offensively or defensively, that you're like, this is a guy that Indiana Hoosier fans are going to want to get behind and cheer because he's going to do something magical on the field for us this fall.
Well, I tell you, one name that sticks out to me is Lewis Moore on defense. He's now playing our free safety position. Came to us a year ago and really had not played a lot of defense, was a receiver at the high school level and then the junior college level. And so really kind of came into his own this spring, I feel like, with his confidence. He's a very good athlete, great ball skills, and also has really good burst to the football. I'm really excited about him. I think he gives us a chance to really, that's a position for me that guy has always been one of our top tacklers. If you look at our history across the years I've been here, started all the way back in 2016, and that guy's just always around the football. And so I think he gives us something that we really, haven't the speed at that spot is something he really brings that's been unique for that position. Sometimes we had a guy there that was a good tackler, but maybe wasn't as athletic as he is. And I think Andre Carter on the defensive line, I think people saw a little bit of that maybe on Saturday, coming to watch him maybe for the first time. But we've not had a defensive end with his size and power. He's 270 pounds and just a very, very mature young man that I'm really excited about. I think he brings, the D-line is a huge part. Pressuring the quarterback's a big deal. So I'm excited about that. I think offensively, continue to be excited about our receivers. I think E.J. Williams, to me, is a guy that has a chance to elevate himself. I keep talking about, Cameron Perry, even though he's an undersized guy, he's really super quick. And we saw him last year as a scout team player on a daily basis as I was there running the defense. And he made a big play about every day. I really believe that. And so those two guys stick out to me as guys that maybe they're new guys, as a redshirt freshman for Cameron, and then also as a transfer in EJ that have a chance to be able to help our football team, to be explosive on offense and make plays. And so, but it's going to be a whole bunch of guys. I could list a bunch more, and it's a collective effort. It's a team effort, and we need a whole bunch of guys to elevate themselves and to be able to, when they come back on in August, ready for September 2nd, they're a better football player than they are right now when they're leaving for the summer.
Coach, last question on my end. I know that you want to get this group back to the postseason. You want to see them capture a bowl. When you look at, and I know we have 5 months, but I also know that you're well aware of what the schedule holds. When you look at how aggressive that first half is in the first 5-6 weeks of the season compared to what the second half holds, how tough will that first half be, but also how much you're going to learn about this group for the first half of the season by the time it rolls around in August?
Well, it'll be very tough. And I don't know if I've ever sat down and never felt that our schedule was anything but that since I've been here going on year 8, as coach on this staff. So we always have a very challenging schedule. Now to open with Ohio State, the second time that's happened since I've been the head coach. And so, they're the team that's been the marquee team in the Big Ten, since I've been here many years before that. So just, there's no ramp-up games, and you got to be at your best right out of the gate. And it is home, which is an awesome thing. So, but then you got a whole bunch of tough ones after that. So you just got to take them one at a time. And that's definitely a cliche that coaches will say, but I've learned that here. You better have tremendous ability to do that. You can't overvalue one of them. They're all very, very, very valuable. And you just say, hey, it's the biggest game of the season because it's the next one. I say it to our team all the time. But you take them one at a time. But what we do is we got to get better. You got to be able to, whatever happens in that first game, you got to improve. Or after that second game, you got to keep getting better and better. That allows you to be able to then finish the way you want to finish. And at the end of the day, like we said, we want to be able to get back to the postseason and be able to have an opportunity to go win that bowl game, which has eluded this program for a long, long time.
Indiana won't have to leave the state. First 4 games of the season coming up in September. Head coach Tom Allen will lead them there. Congratulations on staying healthy this spring, Coach, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Coach.
Oh, you're very welcome. Have an awesome day. Elio.
That is Tom Allen. Infectious in terms of the energy every single time. Do you know how many guys he has on his staff? 28 when you count it down. You're a CEO of an organization within an organization. It is incredible where things have come, and all of them with a specific role to try and keep things together. I always appreciate his time. I always like that question, like the spotlight. Who do you sort of like? And I was hoping that we'd hear Andre Carter's name because, he was absolutely electric this past week. And if you're not aware, transferred in from Western Michigan, eats up a lot of space and can really explode off the line. And I'm not saying it takes one guy, but those are the difference makers that you need in Bloomington, right? Because in your matchups with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, there's just so much depth and strength and first-round talent in the trenches for those teams. But if you can have one or two of those guys that can make a little bit of a difference and disrupt, if there's one thing that Indiana has typically had its athletes on the edges or on the other places. So if you can get into a game where you can control a little bit, just in moments, in key moments in the trenches, that's the difference. And man, oh man, one of these days, it's coming soon, thankfully, we're going to get out of divisions in football. Once they can get out of murderer's row there, holy cow, it'd be a lot easier path for Coach Allen and company.
Yeah, there's no doubt that is on the horizon, and I'm glad he did, like you mentioned, bring up Andre Carter when you asked him to kind of highlight that, because
it's going to be exciting.
Because I was going to follow up with that as well. You just hear the praise that he gave him after spring action on Saturday, the biggest, most physical one I've seen since I've been here. I'm very excited to see Carter on that side of the ball. And then kind of what we led off with him to start the conversation, so much of their success in those fun teams, as I mentioned in 16 and 19 and in 20, were because they had just electric plays on the defensive end and electric players to back that up as well. I'm fascinated by the quarterback competition as that unfolds too. And then he obviously mentioned just the type of weapons they're going to have on the offensive end as well, particularly in the running back room. You look at Jalen Lucas coming back. I'm looking forward to across the board what Tom Allen's able to do, and I hope it's a rebounding year for them. I really do.
It has to be. It has to be for that team, but I think they have the talent to make it one. It just is, can you get off to a good start? You don't have to win that first game, but you have to just do something in that game to springboard you forward into what's a winnable stretch. You get Louisville here at Lucas Oil, sandwiched around a couple of games that you should be able to win in Bloomington if you take care of business down there. So you have a chance for a 3-1 start, and if you can look good, maybe 4-0. Let's pie in the sky there.
Sure.
4-0 if you want to say that. But even if it's 3-1 and you're competitive into the third and fourth quarter
with the
against
gauntlet
Ohio
they have,
State,
you'll take that.
then you'll totally take that.
Yes.
And I think they have at least the talent to do that. The big question will be, can one of those young quarterbacks step up and be the leader of the offense from the early going? I'll tell you this. We talked about one of the bigger players on that team. The biggest college athlete in the state made a little bit of a decision yesterday. Kind of knew it was coming. But what are the trickle-down ripple effects of that in the other sport in the Big Ten that we love to talk about in college basketball? We'll talk about that and more. Jimmy Cook, Will Haskett with you on the Fan Midday Show.
Fan.
Jimmy, you want the falsetto parts, or do you want to take the baritone parts of this song and the sing-along?
I'll take the falsetto.
Okay. And with that, so ends our karaoke here on the Fan
run.
Midday Show, 935-175 from the DriveHubler.com studios. I'm Will Haskett. He's Jimmy Cook. Back into NBA chatter right now, here to lead off hour number 2. Joining us, national NBA reporter for basketball news. He is Evan Sidery, in the midst of a great start to these NBA playoffs. Hey, Evan, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks again for the invite, guys. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Just getting geared up, really, right now for these great playoff runs. I saw your predictions a couple days ago, Evan. You had none of the first-round playoff series going to 7. After a couple of days now of games, do you feel like we've got a series? I've got my eyes on Knicks Cavs maybe going the distance. Anything change from what you've seen these first couple of days?
Yeah, certainly so. I would definitely say 2 series I keep an eye on as far as going the distance. Like you mentioned, Cleveland, New York, those teams are so evenly matched. Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle. And then on the Cleveland side, you obviously have Donovan Mitchell and that big front court of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. That's just going to be a rough and tough series, probably going the distance there. Another one I'm really thinking about, the swing game is here upcoming tomorrow in Sacramento or in Golden State. But with the Warriors versus the Kings, if the Warriors can win Game 3 tomorrow without Draymond Green, who was suspended for stomping on Domantas Sabonis' chest the other couple nights ago, I think that could go to distance too. If they can sneak out the win there in Game 3, get both in Golden State, and then go the distance for 7 games there. Those are the 2 really entertaining series as far as keep an eye on there to go 7.
Evan, Will and I were in consensus earlier when looking at that Kings-Warriors series that I think it's curtains. I know it's dangerous to say with Steph and Clay, but I think they're overmatched. I think this thing is all but wrapped. But you mentioned the optimism there that if they do protect home court, make it a 2-1 series, get Draymond back. What kind of outlook do you give the Warriors in terms of turning the tide, just focused on Game 3 alone without Draymond Green?
Yeah, I think that's the huge pivotal piece of this entire series is how will they respond without Draymond Green. There'd be a lot of pressure on Stephen Curry's shoulders and Klay Thompson. Jordan Poole has been really, to be quite frankly, very inconsistent since signing his lucrative contract extension with the Warriors this past offseason. He's not been great for them at all. He needs a big game in Game 3 as well, but if they can sneak that one out there, it's hard for me to really bet against just with the pedigree they have, the experience they've had in these moments. The Kings have not shown it to me just yet, just because they haven't been in the playoffs for the last 16 years. But, I mean, it's hard to bet against Steph and Clay and those guys if they're fully healthy. But this Kings team, like you mentioned there, Jimmy, with Domantas Sabonis inside, they're kind of dominating inside out there with De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk aggressively attacking the rim almost every possession there. So I think this is a really bad match for the Warriors here. But if they can sneak Game 3, get the momentum swinging back onto their side, I think this is a series that could easily go 7.
Evan Sidery of Basketball News joining us here on the Fan Midday Show. We'll have Lakers-Grizzlies Game 2 coverage tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, the start of the coverage in that one. And while Warriors-Kings on Monday kind of felt like the early game of the week, this is kind of must-watch, must-listen to tonight here, Evan, with so many questions. Will the soft tissue injury keep Ja off the floor or not? That's a huge question. A massive game for the Grizzlies. And Jimmy and I were talking about this in the first hour of the show as well. If it's 50-50, even if it's 30-70 against playing, this is a game that Ja has to find his way on the floor. This is as pivotal of a game as it gets for a team that's relied so much on winning at home.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So I think you have to get it out tonight if you're Ja Morant. Maybe play 20, 25 minutes and just be an offensive dynamo in those minutes if you can. But I think this is a series for me overall where from the beginning I've been favoring the Lakers even before Ja Morant's injury because I think an underrated injury for Memphis' side no one's really talked about is Steven Adams.
Yeah.
He's been a huge key to them on the rebounds, defensively, setting up a lot of their offense too for screens for Ja Morant. Against Anthony Davis, against LeBron James, who love to drive downhill, I think it's a really bad match for this Grizzlies team. So I had Lakers in 6 originally. If Ja can't play tonight or if he's really compromised and can't really be the usual Ja we know, this is probably going to be Lakers in 5 or potentially a sweep because if you go back 2-0 to L.A. with a non-100% Ja Morant, it's 2-0. It's going to be hard for me to bet against that Lakers team with that much momentum on their side there. So this is a key game tonight. I agree with you there. If Ja can go give you at least 15, 20 minutes, I think you got to do it.
Evan, in that same vein, Evan Sidery, nice enough to take some time with us here on the Fan Midday Show. In that same vein, we talked about so often this year, whether it was a couple injuries to Ja, whether it was when he stepped away, to get his mental health in the right spot. Everybody was emphasizing, okay, how do the Grizzlies look without him? Now that matters potentially tonight if he doesn't go 11-10 without him during the regular season, about 2.5 points per game drop off in terms of their overall just offensive look of putting the ball in the basket. If he can't go tonight, I know you mentioned a pretty glaring stare down for them, and that you think it could be sweep or a loss in 5 if he can't go tonight. How do they adjust, and what, if anything, do you take away from what they did in the regular season without him in that 21-game sample size?
Yeah, for Indiana fans, just genuinely curious about tonight. I think it's going to be 2 Indiana natives with a lot of pressure on them with Desmond Bain and Jaren Jackson Jr. We saw Triple J. He did actually very well in Game 1 offensively against Anthony Davis. If he can do that tonight, I think they're set up to do well in that area. But Desmond Bain, he's been very hot and cold throughout this season. He was great, as we all know, last year for Memphis and almost won Most Improved Player. But I think, to be quite honest, he's going to have to put up a 25, 30-point per game kind of performance tonight. And then with Dylan Brooks, he's just a player for me that's really hard to trust offensively. He's a great defender, but overall, if the Grizzlies want to win this game tonight, it's going to have somehow, some way, you get some magical performances from Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Desmond Bain.
Evan, so much excitement about the playoffs, and I think anticipation of excitement here in Indianapolis because of where we expect the Indiana Pacers to be next year, being part of this conversation when we're talking about the opening round of the playoffs, even if it comes through the play-in sort of game standpoint. And that obviously hinges on what they're going to be able to do this offseason. In terms of rumblings, salary caps, everything, the Pacers certainly have the resources to be able to make a move, whether that's a trade with the number of picks. And it's become speculation time here, right? Like, what's the wish list of, who are the 3s or 4s, the wings that might be out there that you could make a move for, or in terms of free agency? The list could be exhaustive if you agree and anything is possible in this league. What are some realistic possibilities that might be out there, whether it's free agency or just teams that are kind of in that, it might be time to blow this thing up, and the Pacers have the resources available to go and get somebody?
Yeah, I'll just cover all the wells here, just going down all 3. But let's just start off with free agency. And a player that I think is underrated right now, and I actually think he fits very well with the Tyrese Halliburton type of point guard, that's Cam Johnson for the Brooklyn Nets. He's a restricted free agent. The Pacers have $25 million in cap space, can easily get to around 35 if they renounce a few more players. That's a player to me. He's a career 40+% three-point shooter, a great defender, a good locker room player from his time in Phoenix and now with Brooklyn. He's a player to me I'd watch out for because we've now seen the Indiana Pacers. They can be aggressive. We saw DeAndre Ayton, who, looking back on it now, probably isn't worth a max contract, but going out and giving him that offer sheet, making the Suns match. I think that's a situation to me with Cam Johnson, who just checks every box to me as far as a great fit with this Pacers team. Going to be 27 years old next season, in the prime of his career. He's a great 3-4 wing option. Another one for me, too, is another Indiana native. That's OG Anunoby with the Toronto Raptors, a guy who I thought was going to be moved to the trade deadline. Didn't happen. I think the Raptors kind of made a mistake there because now I think they're going to get less value for OG Anunoby in a trade this summer. And Indiana's a team to me where I think that makes an awful lot of sense. He's a great defender, a good shooter, a good overall cultural fit as well. He's obviously went to school at IU too, so I think he'd probably stay here long term. Those are a few players to me just as being a good defender, a quality shooter, just a player who's not going to ask for the ball much in a low usage type of role because for those that are wondering, this Pacers team with Tyrese Halliburton on the court last year averaged 121 points per 100 possessions, which is top 5 in the NBA. So this is an elite offense with Tyrese Halliburton running the show here. And they can just at least be competent on defense, Jimmy. This could be a team to me where they could easily be a top 6 seed next year if they push the right buttons.
Evan, I want to switch back big picture NBA playoffs. We already talked about one injury with Ja Morant's status up in the air. The same is true for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Doubtful still at this point in time. Bucks just finished shoot-around a little bit ago. Miami obviously leads that 1-0. Obviously, I joke here and jest because in your forecast, I would have probably picked Bucks in 5-2. You couldn't possibly take into account the idea that a star player is going to go down in that type of synopsis. But when you look at what happens to Milwaukee if Giannis is not out there tonight, we talked about Grizzlies and Kings without Ja for Memphis. How big of an impact is it without Giannis against the Heat for Milwaukee's side of things? And where do they adjust, assuming he's not out there tonight, to try to even this series at a game apiece?
Yeah, this is a tough call for me tonight just because, like you mentioned, it's a super small sample. There's been games here and there where Giannis has missed, where they've looked good. But in the postseason setting in Game 1, the Bucks just looked shell-shocked in Game 1 when Giannis went down, and they just kind of lost rhythm right from the beginning there. But from the Miami side of things, with Tyler Hero now being out for probably the rest of the playoffs if they were to go deep, that's a huge loss for them as being a secondary scorer with Jimmy Butler. So that means even more pressures on Jimmy Butler's shoulders tonight. So I think it's going to be a very close game, even if Giannis doesn't play. if Giannis doesn't play, I'd probably lean towards Miami just based off their postseason experience there. And without Giannis, that's obviously a huge problem for Milwaukee. But I would say Giannis returns in Game 3. I would still pick probably the Bucks in 7, just based off how dominant Giannis Antetokounmpo is. Easily one of the 2 or 3 best players in the NBA when he's fully healthy. So I'd still pick the Bucks in 7 and probably go to distance there. But this Heat team for a while now has been a pretty bad match for this Milwaukee team with their defense, their length, and their shooting ability.
Evan Sidery from Basketball News joining us. We're talking about all these injuries, which kind of seemed, I want to say from an optimistic standpoint, Evan, coincidental in the fact that they all sort of happened in this very short period of time to begin the playoffs. But how much of a concern must this be around the league to see so many stars on the very opening week sort of suffering from this? Jimmy and I talked about earlier in the week, if this is spread out, if Giannis gets hurt in round 2 and Ja's battling a soft tissue injury in round 3 and you lose one player like a Tyler Hero in the opening weekend, it's not probably talked about as much, but there has to be at least a little bit of a ripple wave of concern around the league given what we saw over the last 4 or 5 days in terms of injury news.
Oh, for sure. As far as like the numbers and the ratings go, for sure, that's a big problem when you look at potentially multiple series having multiple stars out. But the postseason for a while now, at least to me, is the refs don't call as much fouls. They let these guys play more aggressively. I know some freak injuries happen, like a Tyler Hero broken hand, where he just gets his hand broken off a tip on the basketball trying to steal the ball there. But I think the postseason to me has always been more aggressive. I think injuries are a lot more likely in the postseason just with the style of play, the heavy injury workload for these guys. For example, in Phoenix last night, Kevin Durant played 46 minutes, and he just came back from a knee injury. So nowadays you're going to see potentially stars be at more risk for injury in these type of do-or-die situations. But it's a good point, though. I mean, you don't want to see these start players, these type of matchups, kind of be dampered down a little bit early on, like you mentioned.
Speaking of matchups being dampered down, last night the NBA drops the hammer on Draymond Green. They suspend him 1 game for stomping on the chest of Domantas Sabonis. Your reaction to that? Were you surprised they followed through? Did you think the ejection in-game in the fourth quarter the other night was enough? And then given his absence now, I know we already talked about what the game plan is for the Warriors, but when you look at his suspension as a whole, what does that do to the rest of the series?
It totally changes the series for sure. And I have mixed feelings about how the Draymond suspension came about because I know, like, getting into semantics here, we don't know 100% everyone's side there. But to me, it looked like Domantas Sabonis grabbed Draymond's leg, and he might be at fault in this a little bit too. I know he mentioned that didn't happen, but there's a lot of angles that kind of proved he grabbed it. The retaliation part on Draymond's part, though, super unnecessary, and the way he reacted afterwards, kind of taunting the crowd, I think that kind of is what pushed it over the edge for a suspension, in my opinion. It was more so his reaction afterwards and what he did. But I think it's just based off his premise, his overall reputation. I think overall we've seen the last 5, 6, 7 years, Draymond Green in pivotal moments lose his cool. I think players know that. I think Domantas Sabonis, smartly enough, did that, and it worked out perfectly for the Kings here because now him missing Game 3, if they go into Game 3 and just keep doing what they're doing offensively, without Draymond Green, it's hard for me to see them kind of being competitive here unless they have a Steph Curry superhero type of game in Game 3. So it changes it completely in my opinion. I think the Kings probably win Game 3 now unless Steph does indeed go off. But let's say Steph does go off. I'd say Warriors in 7. But this Game 3 swing is absolutely huge. Not having Draymond Green out there for them is gigantic.
Evan, you can't see us here on the YouTube chat. We both kind of rose up and looked at our producer, Eddie Garrison, because me and him had a conversation to start the show.
Conversation? You had a reenactment.
We did have a
full reenactment.
We did have a reenactment of what happened, and I want to get a clarification for you and bring you into the debate circle. You mentioned Eddie's point, which is that looks like that Domantas Sabonis grabs his leg. I think he definitely did grab his leg, but it looks like he did. And then Draymond responds, and that was Eddie's point. My point was, well, there's a fine line between the way you respond and stomping somebody in the chest. Your thoughts on that, of if it was warranted for the stomp, or like basically does he get a free pass because Sabonis held him, or is there a proper way to respond to that versus, curb stomp to the chest?
Yeah, I hope this explanation makes sense because I think it's one where most other players, probably 90% of star players, do not get suspended in the situation. But I just think it's the Draymond Green tax here, where it's happened multiple times in the past. Adam Silver's probably like, you did it for the 4th or 5th time now in the last 7 or 8 years. You got to learn your lesson at some point, and he might just did it because of that. I mean, I think simply because Draymond has had these issues consistently in postseason play, I think it's kind of just Adam Silver slapping on the wrist here and saying, what in the world are you doing? I think the retaliation part for him was a little overboard. I would say just stomping on him. That kind of reminded me of the Ndamukong Suh situation about 10-plus years ago at the Lions and what happened there. But I think with him, it's a situation to me where it's the Draymond Green tax. I just think that's simply it. If it was Sabonis that did that the other way around, I think he's fine and he's not suspended.
And Joe Dumars pretty much said that today in his comments to Woj that, look, this is exactly what probably happened in terms of the fact that we've seen a character flaw and a repeated violation of this moving forward. Evan, when you look at the playoff series we've had, there's so many compelling series. We've talked a lot about Lakers Grizzlies tonight. The Kings Warriors series is getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. Maybe more so today for the bad instead of the good for the Kings. And then we could go this entire segment, if I didn't bring this up, without talking about probably the most boring series of this opening round that you picked to go in 4. It's probably going to go in 4. The Celtics just doing what the Celtics do. If you had, is this the year they get the monkey off of their back? The way that we've sort of seen the injury start to Giannis, and I know I'm playing a long sort of game here, but all of this stuff happening, all of this news cycle, and Boston just doing what it needs to do, are they almost undervalued in terms of their championship potential?
I think so. Just based off the Giannis injury, what happens there, it's going to be a whole pendulum swing one way or the other. I would lean Milwaukee if Giannis is 100% healthy and he gets back to his usual self there. But if not, certainly I would take the Celtics. I think one team that's being a little slept on here, though, is Philadelphia. I just think that this could be the kind of year they break through. They have shooters. They have great defenders. James Harden doesn't have the pressure on his shoulders offensively. He has Tyrese Maxey now blossoming next to him. Joel Embiid could put up 35-40 on most nights. But like you mentioned, though, this defense with Boston, Robert Williams, you have great defenders, Derek White blossoming in Boston this year as well, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, one of the best 1-2 wingos in the NBA. I would certainly say that's a great matchup potentially in the Eastern Conference Finals or to happen. I would probably say Celtics in 7 if we get to that hypothetical there. So I would say Boston does probably make the finals here in the Eastern Conference. I would say it's a coin flip between a healthy Bucks team and a healthy Celtics team. But for me, the Western Conference, too, especially, whoever they face, I think the Boston Celtics will be the favorites in any series they come up against.
Evan, when will casual fans or just playoff watchers, maybe haven't been watching all season, remember that the Denver Nuggets are the number 1 seed in the West? And why is it that they just can't get any love? Why?
Won't happen. No, won't happen.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's more so that Nikola Jokic is the most quiet kind of generational superstar we've ever seen, where he's not going to ask for the attention. He's just going to go out and do the triple doubles every night. They have great role players, which are not, I wouldn't even say role players. I would say really good players in Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon. That's a really well-constructed team around Nikola Jokic as far as kind of hiding him defensively. I think it's more so just about, can the Nuggets finally get over the hump in the postseason? We've seen this now 3 or 4 years in a row where the Nuggets are a top 3, top 4 seed, but in the end, they always disappoint in the first, second round. And that could potentially happen again here. I think it could be a very quick series against the Timberwolves, probably 4 or 5 games if they really want to. But the next series, probably most likely against the Phoenix Suns, I think that's a really tough match for the Denver Nuggets. With Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, probably the best 1-2 scoring combination in the NBA, in my opinion, when they're fully go. I think I've picked the Suns in that situation. I just think it's more so the superstar talent the postseason wins out here. But this Nuggets team, it feels like a make-or-break kind of year for them, because if this is the year they're finally going to break through, Jokic having another incredible year, all your good players around him having incredible career-high years, this just feels like Denver's time. If they can't break through, I don't know what happens next for them.
Suns and Clippers are tied up heading back to L.A. Is it more likely that one of those two teams wins the series or one of those two teams loses the series, if you understand the gist of my question?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the Suns winning this series outright, because Paul George likely won't play in this series. Potentially, I mean, if the season's on the line in a Game 6 or something like that, I think he could probably come back and play 15, 20 minutes if he wants to. But I think the Suns team, just based off experience, they're gelling in real time in the postseason, which has not really happened much before. The superstar player, I think since Wilt Chamberlain, when that trade happened about 60-plus years ago, was probably the biggest superstar trade midseason that we've seen, and Kevin Durant kind of tops that one. And him gelling with Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, and a pretty thin bench now after the trade they made. It's going to be curious to see how they actually operate throughout the postseason here, because if they can actually get chemistry, if Kevin Durant and Devin Booker can thrive in postseason basketball like they have the last 5-6 years, I think this is a team where they should steamroll through the Western Conference. But the question to me is, are they going to be able to go up against a Denver team that is fully cohesive, has all the chemistry in the world, and go and beat them in their building, potentially the 7-game series?
Good stuff, Evan. As always, some fascinating playoff series, including this game 2 tonight with the Lakers and the Grizzlies, 1 of 3. I know you'll be watching. We appreciate your insight. Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, guys.
That's Evan Sidery. You can follow him on Twitter at @eSidery. That's Sidery. National NBA reporter for Basketball News. My last question there, it's like I almost feel like that's one of those series where something's going to happen where someone shoots themselves in the foot. Like both of those teams had a chance to win game 1, and neither of them really wanted to win it. And the Clippers ended up being the one down the stretch where a horrible performance, Russell Westbrook just found a way to win the game. Like if that game goes to 52 minutes, then maybe the Suns win it, and vice versa when it's all sort of said and done. But the Suns just seem like a team that should win every time they play, and they're going to find a way not to win. But I say the same thing about the Nuggets, too. You ask about why no one's paying attention. Well, they didn't really play that great down the stretch, so why Jokic isn't going to be the MVP. We can go back to all the hot take debates about Jokic versus Embiid from 3 or 4 months ago, and they look kind of silly now because Embiid's going to be the MVP, it feels like, with the way he played versus Jokic's team down the stretch, although I guess that's still up for some debate when it's all said and done. But they're not going to win a title, and they didn't play that well going into the playoffs. Like it doesn't feel like a team that's going to be left standing unless the more talented teams around them, a la the Suns, find a way to just implode on themselves, which we kind of saw in game 1 of that series with the Clippers.
The other thing that you need, and obviously his injury in the bubble kind of derailed a lot of things, but I was all but ready to crown Jamal Murray as the next top guard in the league. And you saw flashes of the brilliance again the other night. That's the high level you're going to need from him being a running mate alongside the big fella in Nikola Jokic. If you're not able to get, I don't know if the bar's 30, but you need strong scoring outputs of the highest degree from Jamal Murray if you're going to have any shot against Phoenix or any other team that you want to draw out of the West.
If you did build a franchise around a player draft in that bubble, and you had to choose between Murray or Devin Booker, given the performance that we saw from Murray, you'd be like, oh my gosh, please give me this guy. And now that narrative has shifted.
Yeah, exactly. I would have argued that you would have been happy with either one of them. And now it has completely, to your point, gone the other way in Devin Booker. And a part of that is because he stayed healthy. The other thing, though, about Suns Clippers, and I'm not saying the Suns are now immune to shooting themselves in the foot, and I'm not saying that maybe there's adjustments made by Ty Lue. They figured it out from a defensive standpoint. They figured out at this point that the Clippers can only do so much without Paul George.
Yes.
Like Kawhi, you can let him get his, but if you're going to double him or bring that type of pressure and tenacity with him possession by possession, you match them blow for blow on the offensive side, eventually you're going to pull away because there's just not enough around him to answer the bell. Like you can maybe get turn the clock back from Eric Gordon, like he's been efficient at times from beyond the arc, but there's not enough, go-to guy, Trey Mann off the bench, whoever you want to go to, there's not enough secondary help there without Paul George, and that's ultimately why I think the Suns have it figured out. I'm not saying the Clippers won't get a game at Crypto, but it's Suns, I think, have this set now.
A bannable offense for me to say this next line, but could you imagine Paul George on this Pacers roster? Like, just how good that piece would be. I mean, the fit would be so good. Oh, well, you can only dream. You can only dream about what could happen. You can also only dream about what may. Oh, go ahead. Please finish. I was segueing into a break.
No, that was terrible. It was bad. Okay, I'm going to say it anyway now. Now that I've
we're going to
keep
it. Forget the breaks.
Now that
keep talking.
Now that I haven't turned on my turn signal and I've just gone over and did a lane without giving you any notice for it. The only other thing I wanted to mention from that conversation with Evan, and we didn't talk about this about Draymond, Adam Silver was in the building. Adam Silver was there for that game. The
revving up of the crowd thing we haven't talked about. It's so true. It's like you're being an absolute A. Can I say that? I'm most of the time on satellite radio. Can I say the A word on the air? I probably can't. You're being, you're just being a total jerk in that building. Like it's a look at me sort of mentality. Like, it's nuts. Like, it's so tiring. Like I'm tired.
You got annoyed by a large, this large white guy with a beard and a Kings jersey yelling at Draymond Green back and forth, and security having to step in.
No, but it's like, just go to the.
No, I'm kidding. I was taken aback. What are we doing?
Go to the huddle, man. Like, it's infuriating. You know what's also infuriating? I'm still gonna do the segue. What's infuriating is the fact that we're still a week away from draft day, and I feel as if, from an NFL standpoint, we are now making up new things in our head just because we've run out of being able to talk about the same thing. I'll explain why, because it feels as if if we're reading the tea leaves are totally changing, even though nothing has really changed from the first time we were talking about this a week ago, because people are just saying crazy stuff to say crazy stuff. We'll sort through the crazy stuff coming up next year on the Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, Will Haskett with you on 93.5 and 107.5. Midday Show, midway through the Midday Show with Jimmy Cook. I'm Will Haskett. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. A gorgeous Wednesday. We're getting back to normal weather outside. Enjoy it while it lasts. It's going to be another cold and chilly and looks like wet weekend. So get your outdoor activities done right now. Getting some dirt delivered later this week. Mulch is coming in. Oh, yeah, it's that time of year. You get into a wheelbarrow. I mean, this is the exciting things that happen when you hit 40 and you get excited about Lowe's coming by to drop off a whole bunch of dirt and mulch. And do you know how many cubic yards of mulch my yard takes?
How many?
45. Wow. 45 cubic yards of mulch for my property.
How long have you known that? How long has that information been in your pocket that you've been aware of that?
Well, the first year we didn't get enough. Then the second year was the pandemic, and I did only the necessary spots by hand by bag, which was different. And then since then I've hired it out. But it's a really tasty nugget when you're hiring out that at that quantity.
Already ready for it. Yeah, we've had a house since 2020, and I like to judge like how excited you get about lawn work.
Yeah.
In correlation to what age you are in your life. Still yet to hit the point where I'm going to give an oh yeah to get mulch.
Yeah,
arrival.
mulch. Yeah, no, I mean it's just I got to work more. I got to do. I got to answer the phone when they say, "Hey, can you come in and do the midday show?" It's like, yeah, I got to pay for the mulch. I'm going to build a fire pit, I think, coming up next week. So
Nice.
I've got that project on the horizon. I mean, it's exciting in theory to say you're going to do it, and then when you actually start doing it, and you're hauling 70-pound, boulders around and things like that to move, it's a little bit different. It is serious labor, which is also serious labor when it comes to trying to avoid new NFL draft rumors with the draft mercilessly just a week and a day away from us next week. Where will the Colts be drafting? That's the forever question. Aaron Wilson, by the way, from iHeart down in Houston, going to join us at 2 o'clock. We're going to figure out how much fire there may actually be to the smoke coming out of Houston about the Texans and their willingness to maybe move away from the second pick if it seems as if Bryce Young is certainly going to go to Carolina number 1. Right after we were on this airwaves together, Jimmy, on Monday, you had the whole Adam Schefter on NFL Live on ESPN talking about the fact that this idea of 4 quarterbacks going 1 through 4 is ridiculous. There may only be 2, and if the Colts just stuck at 4, that the Texans and the Cardinals in front of them would stay put and draft defensive players. It's not inconceivable, but what I will say is it's such a huge 180-degree departure from what everybody's talking about beforehand that it's almost ridiculous to think that we would shift to that idea without even contemplating the middle, which is probably more likely to happen. Will 4 quarterbacks get taken 1 through 4? It could happen. It's never happened before, so I'm going to say no, it doesn't happen. But the concept that C.J. Stroud is still sitting there at 4 for a Colts team that hasn't moved and nobody else has moved ahead of them to 2 or 3, and those 2 teams that stay pat, neither one of them also drafted quarterback, seems to me even more ridiculous of a reality than the 4 quarterbacks going 1 through 4. And somehow that has become the talking point of the last 48 hours.
Here's my larger issue with it. Adam Schefter, his reputation precedes him as one of the best in the world at breaking news.
Yes.
Not going to dispute that. I appreciate it in any form that I can get it because I, like most people, gimme. I love the Nuggets. I want the news. I want to know what the big moves are. Totally get that. That's the name of the trade. When you have him on NFL Live, though, in that setting where it blurs the line between
he's making the news, not reporting the news,
and opinion.
Yes.
And you make it come from the face of the network who gives the facts and the news. For a lot of casual fans, and for a lot of fans in general, like I had to think about it for a second. How are they presenting this? For a lot of casual fans, it's, this is real circulating now. Adam has heard this. There's a strong chance or a good chance that C.J. Stroud might still be available at 4. When it's actually being presented as Adam's giving his opinion with a bit of a mix of what he's heard. That's the larger danger of this to me, because we already live in a society where you have misinformation all the time and people don't always trust what they're hearing. And then you have a source that is usually, whether he is more favored to, plays the agent's game. We know he does that. Whether he's doing that or not, doesn't matter when you put him on there and suddenly he's giving an opinion when it's construed in a way that makes you think it's actually fact.
Admittedly, Adam Schefter is formulating opinions from a place of far more factual information at his fingertips than you or especially me have when it comes to this situation.
His ground's stronger for sure.
I typically approach all of my opinions when it's based off of past experiences and logic. Like, logic tends to win out more times than other. You can go to Occam's razor, whatever the thing is. I mean, the most likely of the occurrences in an equal environment is going to come true. I probably messed up exactly how the interpretation of that is going to be. Understand what I'm saying when it comes to it. This is a league that is fixated on getting one position not just right, but home run right. It used to be just get it right. Like, have somebody that can be functional and lead your team. It has now become the only way you're going to reach the promised land is to hit that home run. And if you have to gamble multiple times to hit that home run, it's worth it for you. I mean, case in point, Philadelphia Eagles use a second-round pick on Jalen Hurts. Maybe they sort of knew that Carson Wentz was damaged goods, but they had a serviceable quarterback in the building and used a pick on a guy who now just is signing a $255 million extension coming off of ankle surgery, by the way, which is incredible to sort of think about how this is all sort of played out. You have multiple teams. It is reported today C.J. Stroud is meeting with the Falcons, who own the 8th overall pick and spent a high draft pick last year on Desmond Ridder to conceivably be their quarterback, and maybe there's been enough information on him for them to warrant looking into moving up in this draft for another body. Trey Lance is apparently on the trading block in San Francisco because Brock Purdy is the quarterback of the future? ? Look for Kirk Cousins in San Francisco, by the way, in a year from right now. I'm just going to throw that out there. But it's all of these things lead back to one thing, and that is every team will do whatever it takes to try and hit a home run with quarterback, which means when you have a guaranteed team in the top 3 who's not looking to draft a quarterback, that pick is in play and will be moved. And I just cannot arrive at a place where even if you think that Will Anderson is a first ballot Hall of Fame defensive specialist that DeMeco Ryans would want in Houston, or that Arizona desperately needs with Watt retiring and that defense being just absolutely abused last year in Arizona, that you still will not have a team willing to overpay to get into that position to draft a quarterback. And I just can't understand how we have arrived at a place where we now think that nobody's going beyond Bryce Young 2 or 3 from the quarterback perspective. Now, I could be totally wrong. If I'm in here next Friday after the draft is over with and the Colts stay pat at 4 and get C.J. Stroud, I will strip naked and lead the parade down through Monument Circle, because that would be the greatest scenario in the history of Colts drafts. It'd be even better than some of the luck they've fallen into in some other draft scenarios, because I just can't imagine that happening. But for
Looks
whatever
like you're
reason,
stripping naked
and we're going. I just can't take this leap that all of a sudden the number 2 and number 3 picks are being valued by their present holders in a non-quarterback way enough to keep them to make that scenario come true.
I can drink the Kool-Aid on the Texans trading the pick. I can accept that. I could even accept the thought that they would take Will Anderson. I could get behind that. What I can't get behind is the thought that if Stroud is suddenly available at 3, that
100%.
Nobody's trading up with
100%.
Arizona to go get him. I can't imagine a world where that happens.
Right. Which I have been a 51-49% stay pat for a little while for the Colts. I don't want a knee-jerk overpaying situation like we saw, say, with the number 1 pick. I mean, give it credit to Carolina. They think Bryce Young's going to be the truth in the future, but that was a haul, an absolute haul of resources to give up to move to that number 1 spot, and I don't think the Colts, and whatever they would have to do to match that with that pick for the Bears, would have been worth it. But I'm kind of leaning closer to what Kevin Bowen talks a lot about on the morning show. Is it's now to that point where you're going to have to probably look into, can we offer something to Arizona to just go ahead and get to 3 and then let the whole thing play out so that we don't have to worry about a last-second overbidding situation. And if you go to ESPN.com, one of the lead stories right now is Will Bardwell, who's kind of making all the various picks, and his is that it's a first-round swap the Colts would make, and then you give up 2 third-round picks, 1 this year, 1 next year, and 1 of your 3 fifth-round picks this year. That, to me, is a totally reasonable amount of draft picks or draft capital, I think, if the scenario plays out where, or you at least provide yourself the backup of, if that number 2 quarterback is available at 3, you're there to be able to snatch him up.
But here's the catch-22 with that, and why I would not make a deal. And maybe you're not saying this. Are you saying that the Colts would be better off to make a deal with Arizona for the sake of argument today, so they don't have to get into a bidding war?
I think we're getting closer to that being. I'm getting closer to thinking that's the right thing to do than waiting, because if there is fire behind the smoke in Houston as it relates to number 2, then all of a sudden number 3 becomes even more important for the Colts. You see what I'm saying? Like if you know Houston's taking C.J. Stroud, then it goes to your evaluation of the 2 guys on the board. And I don't necessarily know if they're, because I'm a CJ Stroud guy, which is what we have to kind of establish in all of this. Like, like you and I have talked about this. If there's a debate and they're 1A and 1B, and then you've got maybe call them 1C and 1D, or it's really more 2A and 2B in this sort of quarterback class, then you have to put yourself in a. Houston's not trading with Indianapolis. Like I saw that said by somebody too.
And I love him to death. Peter Schrager did a mock yesterday, and
it's never happening.
Never in a million years has somebody traded division like that. No.
So if you now think that there's more of a likelihood that the number 2 quarterback in this class could be there at 3, then maybe you have to skip the line more so than you were going to before.
And the catch-22, I wanted to make sure I got your point established and I wasn't, putting words in your mouth. The reason I would give pause there is because if, to the way you started this segment, which is people are getting very good at going into the workshop and making up new angles, making up new ways to look at this. If that's all this is, and we're going to get a clearer picture, I would think, a little bit when we talk to Aaron Wilson here at the top of next hour. But if that's all this is, and you make that trade today and you give up a little more than you would have liked to, but you're like, okay, now we're in that prime position, and the Texans actually take Stroud at 2. I mean, yes, you have your pick of Levis and Richardson now, but I'm only making that trade for Stroud. I'm not necessarily making that trade for Levis or Richardson.
I think, and we talked about this on Monday, there's infatuation with the tools, the skills of Richardson in this draft class, not to mention the fact that you have a couple of other really solid potential players that are available for you at 3. Because if it goes to 2 quarterbacks and Will Anderson's now still on the board at 3, you're in a position of power at that point in time. If you're Chris Ballard, you may not recoup the entire draft capital that you gave up to move there. No, this is crazy. Like, you don't move up to move back down. But if you're covering yourself in the case, I don't make a lot of sense here, do I?
I mean, it's tough because you're not what you just said. You're not going to trade up to trade back down.
If you believe that there are 6 teams shopping for 3 before this Houston rumor has become a little bit more substantiated over the last couple of days, if you believe the Houston rumor that it's up for sale and you can't get to that pick, then 3 all of a sudden, I don't know, I think it becomes more valuable from a potential standpoint, because before you're operating saying, I have to get to 3 so I get my 3rd choice, right? That's the only reason why you're moving to 3 right now, is the number 3 quarterback on your board is going to be available and you want to go get a quarterback. If number 2 could be used for defense, if number 2 might be moved for whatever reason, another quarterback or something, but like there's now more of a rationale or more of a rumor belief that 2 could be a non-quarterback situation, then 3 in theory has become more valuable.
I totally agree. I think, though, that they either have the same evaluation or close to the same evaluation
from Stroud to Richardson.
No. Not of them 3, of the 2, to the point that, let's say it's
I
all
agree
smoke
with that.
screen
I
and
agree
they
with
take
that.
Stroud, they would have done it already. If they wanted to ensure they got Levis and Richardson and they had their grades set, they would have tried to have a trade with Arizona already.
And then maybe they have.
And maybe they have made that call.
Because
right?
as we've said, Arizona shouldn't do anything until draft night.
Correct. But for me, I'm with you. I would do it now, because the worst case scenario, okay, now who I want, not over Stroud, but who I want, I'm getting Anthony Richardson now. I'm guaranteed to get him. We had a pipe dream of Stroud. We make that trade today, though. Either we get Stroud because the Texans don't go quarterback, or you have your choice of Richardson or Levis guaranteed. I don't think the Colts would make that move, because I think they have a similar evaluation to Richardson or Levis. They are perfectly comfortable with whoever falls on them at 4. To be clear, I think that's the wrong decision.
Yeah.
I think Richardson is going to be the better prospect. That's who I want here in Indy.
I think he is the better prospect.
I think he's going to be the better long-term option. I don't know the Colts view it that way.
I don't think so either. I would agree with you.
I've kind of accepted the fact in the back of my mind, Will Levis is coming to Indianapolis at 4.
Quarterback.
Yeah. And I don't again, it's not what I want to have happen. I'll wish him well. And I saw a clip from he did a sit down with Peyton Manning the other day that I haven't got a chance to see, but he was talking about he can throw and hit a crossbar basically on his knees from beyond midfield. I can't remember if it was the opposite 30 or what it was. It was insane. Exactly. But that's the thing.
Go!
That's the thing, right? Woo! That's great. That's really cool.
Yeah.
It's more to it than just that.
I can hit a golf ball 275 yards, and I didn't win. Woo! I didn't win the RBC Heritage last weekend. That's for sure. Yeah, it's
Will Haskett for the Masters.
It's weird. It's totally crazy to sort of think about this, and none of these teams should react to fake hype that is out there. But we know that there's not going to be the second quarterback waiting at 4. It's just the question now of, do you think it's not going to be a 1-2 quarterback draft class? And if you don't think that that's the case, then Arizona is sitting back with their heels up being like, this is awesome. The other thing, too, about it is, say Houston stays at 2 and they pick Will Anderson. Well, what does Arizona then want? Like, they don't want they don't want CJ Stroud. They don't need a quarterback. If Anderson, like many have said, is rated so much higher as a defensive prospect than anybody else, Jalen Carter, a couple of the cornerbacks, the guys that are sort of the kid from Texas Tech who's like the next edge rusher that's there.
Tyree Wilson.
I don't think they have. I don't think anybody is saying that those guys are necessarily worth the 3rd overall pick either. Maybe Arizona even loses some leverage in this scenario where Will Anderson goes off the board at 2.
It would be clinically insane if Stroud is still there at 4. Like, the more
I don't think it would be.
Well, but to his point, though, because if Arizona's there and Anderson's off the board, are they using 3 on Jalen Carter?
I mean, you just hired a defensive-minded head coach, and you had major problems on the defensive side of the ball last year.
But
what are you going to do? You have to cater to that head coach and let him do what he wants.
But what if you trade back, let's say, I don't have the draft order in front of me, so apologies. I'm forgetting who's at 5.
Carolina, Houston, Arizona, Indy, then it's Seattle at 5, who would love if Jalen Carter fell to them. I think that's kind of where the tea leaves are on this one. Detroit's a wild card at 6, Las Vegas at 7, Atlanta at 8, who again hosting CJ Stroud today, which means is Atlanta looking to move up and take that Houston Texans pick or that Arizona pick at 3 if things are going in their direction. Chicago at 9, Philadelphia at 10.
I guess you have to take. You're probably right, Eddie, because it was Seattle there. Because they're not going to trade up to get Carter, because their thought is, well, the Colts aren't going to take Carter. They're going to take a quarterback. Why would I trade up with you?
Right.
Like, to help you out, because all of a sudden your draft board's gone because Will Anderson's there. So yeah, they probably do take Carter.
Or they go with the edge guy from Texas Tech and Tyree Wilson, who's been climbing up the board.
But maybe you think that the draft capital you get back from a team like the Raiders or a team like Detroit, just for the sake of argument, with Stroud still available there, what you're banking on if you're Arizona, if the Texans go Will Anderson Jr., you are banking that the aggression of other GMs is going to be to the point that you get an offer that's too good to not scoop up. Like if the Raiders, sake of argument, this isn't on your draft grade what would happen. The Raiders offered a first rounder next year to go get CJ Stroud.
They wouldn't be going up for Stroud. I can tell you that.
You understand my example? Like,
yeah, I get it.
If they did it, I'd take it.
Al Davis isn't with us anymore, so Richardson isn't the slam dunk because he has the best measurables.
I said Stroud, but you're right. Yeah, that's true. You brought that up yesterday. So I don't know. That's what you're banking on if you're Arizona. But all paths, unless this apocalyptic scenario pulls through where the Texans don't take Stroud, nobody trades up with the Texans to get Stroud. That's the bigger thing, I think, than the Cardinals is if they dangle it, I would think somebody would come calling with the Texans to go get
I think
Stroud.
on this particular day, given what we've heard, I don't think the second quarterback falls to the 4th overall pick.
It would surprise me.
But I do think the number 3 pick is more valuable to the Colts right now because of the potential hypotheticals, but is less valuable to the Cardinals, if that makes crazy sort of sense. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because if they stay put thinking that Will Anderson's going to be there no matter what, quarterback 1, quarterback 2, even if we don't trade out of this pick, we get a generational defensive edge rusher, which is conceivable. I can conceive a draft scenario where there are no trades up because the asking price is too high and every single team on the board is like, it's not worth it for what Arizona is asking for. And Arizona's like, fine, we'll take Will Anderson because Houston was going to take a quarterback. So I can make a case to you right now that Arizona right now is losing some of its value because if there's a team ahead of them also dangling, then it's like, well, if Atlanta or Vegas can go to 2 and guarantee themselves of CJ Stroud or whoever they want as the second overall pick, then that diminishes the number of trade partners that we have right here. So I'm saying in this scenario, it's more valuable for the Colts to be at 3 in case something crazy happens, and it's less valuable right now for Arizona operating in this hypothetical that the number 2 pick could get moved. So that's why I'm sort of saying, is it worth a call? Just say,
definitely
hey,
worth a call.
Let's just go ahead and if you guys want to if you just want to swap back 1 and still get either of the 2 defensive studs in this draft, like it's guaranteed to happen that way for him, right? Because Arizona knows that Indy's taking that spot to get a quarterback. You know a quarterback's going 1, so Anderson or Carter's still going to be there at 4
right.
for it. it's the rare situation where it's like I could see Arizona being like, yeah, maybe we should get out of this spot if we believe that Houston's shopping that pick, and the Colts are like, yeah, maybe we are willing to give up 2/3 and a fifth to guarantee that we're going to be there to get our guy.
But the peak for their value to me is the closer we get to the draft.
It's still, I still,
like why I would keep my
believe
chips
it is.
and not cash out.
100%.
It only gets stronger for you or provides more clarity for you the closer we get to the draft.
100%. But that was the case 4 or 5 days ago. We still said wait until the draft for Arizona to make that sort of move. But that was also operating in a world where we thought quarterback was going 1 and quarterback was going 2. And we're going to find out from Aaron Wilson if that is still the case, maybe, and what they're feeling coming up in Houston at the top of the next hour. We got to get out of it because we're up against it here in this segment. More of the Fan Midday Show coming your way here on a beautiful Wednesday on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. That's Jimmy Cook. I'm Will Haskett. Fan Midday Show. Aaron Wilson from Houston coming up in just a couple of minutes. We'll talk about all of the smokescreen from Houston that we were just talking about in the last segment. Shaq Leonard speaking to the media right now. Everybody there, your Twitter feeds. This is my favorite. This is my favorite part of this, Jimmy, is that you get the same quote like 5 different times in the feed as people are doing it. But Shaquille Leonard saying, "I feel better than I did at any point last year." Adds, this is all from Zach Kiefer's Twitter account. He's got a long way to go. He's not himself yet. He regrets coming back and playing last year when he did because he wasn't physically all the way back. He felt slow, played slow, and hated it. And that's in my opinion, a Captain Obvious sort of quote. I didn't think he helped the defense. In fact, he hurt the defense when he came back and played last year. But I like the ownership of it, Jimmy, which gives me some hope for Shaquille Leonard's value on this defense for Gus Bradley's unit this coming year, because with that contract and with the offseason departures and the depth in that linebacker room, you need Shaquille Leonard to be 2021 Leonard and not 2022 Leonard on the field this year.
I expect nothing less from Shaq Leonard in terms of ownership and accountability. I feel like that's been one of the biggest just air marks of his time here in Indianapolis.
Transparent guy.
He's not going to beat around the bush. He's going to get straight to it. He, in fact, and we're citing everybody that's there. Everybody's seeing these same quotes, but Mike Chappell mentioned as well, quote, "I hurt the team when I was on the field last year." And you and I talked about that during the break. He definitely did. There probably wasn't,
no question,
with what Shaq Leonard was health-wise, performance-wise last year due to injury. He was not a difference maker for that defense. In fact, it was probably more regression on the defensive side of the ball when he was there last year. Your hope, obviously, is that it's a bounce-back year. My only issue, and it's not like Shaq Leonard's not misleading anybody here, but I am at a stage with him, and I think he would probably feel the same way about himself or any critics that want to point this way. I appreciate the accountability. I appreciate you saying it. I appreciate you telling us you're feeling a whole lot better than you did anytime last year. There were times, though, where I think he's still outwardly projected, not lying. He believed it. I'm going to come back. I'm going to get right. I feel like this is going to be a bounce-back year for me, and it wasn't. So I'm in a stage now here on April 19th where I appreciate all that. I need to see it, and I know he knows that he needs to show it before I'm ready to put my heart back out there, so to speak, if you're a Colts fan.
It's a pivotal year for him. I mean, Chris Ballard's a general manager that would be in the Hall of Fame if we just judged him only on linebacker talent, signings, and his ability to judge that. And what Leonard provided from a turnover standpoint was the value. It's what led to his contract. His hustle, his energy, all of that stuff attracts him to this fan base, especially in this market, and it's why we love him as a player. But the value that he brought in his aggressiveness and sometimes out of positionness because of that aggression is the fact that he just had an obscene number of turnovers created. And if he can duplicate that or even come close to it, you give me 75% of the turnovers he created when he was fully healthy, and that's a difference maker on the field. And he knows that, but in a year where we've seen a lot of guys get big contracts, Jimmy, when we've seen some big name linebackers get moved, and you sort of look at that contract now and the health of Shaq Leonard, you better. I believe what he says, and it needs to be on the field as well.
And there's no real out anymore, right? There's no way to get around that contract anymore. Like, most of the damage has already been done, and even if you wanted to do something with it, you're looking at pennies on the dollar for what you could have added. You tried to move him earlier. So at this point, you were where you're at with him. It's just like, look, this is the stage of the year that we're at. Like, I don't expect necessarily anything less from Shaq Leonard or any other Colts player than to tell me I feel good. That's how it should be. But again, we need action. Unfortunately, we can't get that for another 5 months.
We'll have action from Houston next. Aaron Wilson joins us. We'll talk about what that second pick looks like for the Texans here on The Fan.
The Fan.
Fan Midday Show here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. I'm Will Haskett. Jimmy Cook in as well. Eddie Garrison's pitching a perfect game thus far, including dialing up and bringing on our final guest of the day. We spent a lot of time in the last hour talking about what might happen in front of the Colts coming up in this draft, and there's more wrinkles to that story if you believe the rumor mill here over the last couple of days to help us decipher what's true, what's not, and what might still happen. It's our man down in Houston, Aaron Wilson from KPRC and iHeart 760 in Houston. Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Fantastic, thanks. Okay, we were on the air, I think, on Monday when the idea that the second pick was perhaps up for grabs or on the market, or it may not be as simple from a quarterback standpoint. So there's a lot of smoke that's drifting northeast from Houston over Indianapolis right now. Aaron, is there a fire on the ground there, or is it just smoke at this point in time?
As far as what will be fire?
As how available the second pick is to the NFL.
No, it's available. That's true. Yeah, you can trade for the second pick. Absolutely.
Not the Colts, though. Anybody else could trade for it. There's no way they're dealing that pick to Indianapolis.
No, you don't do that. You don't help your rival in the AFC South. No, the Colts. Yeah, that's a click. That's a no thank you.
It's a hard hang up.
So do you remember when Deshaun Watson, they made an inquiry? Yeah, it was a no. I mean, and that's not strange. That's just normal. Yeah. That's nothing personal. I mean, they respect the Colts. I believe, even though it's a rivalry, the organizations, have respect for each other, and friendly is the right word, but definitely nothing antagonistic toward each other, and that includes the players. But no, you don't do that. You don't make that trade.
Aaron, I guess kind of keep this fire analogy going along, a secondary fire that I'll bring up in regards to the second overall pick. I thought for a while that, okay, whether it's Young or Stroud, it's a quarterback by the Texans at 2. The other rumor mill comment has been, well, they really like Bryce Young, and if he's not there, they're not sold on C.J. Stroud. Is that what you're hearing in your circles?
Yeah, that's what I'm reporting, that Bryce Young is a Panther. Just needs to become official. So Bryce Young goes to the Panthers, and that was the quarterback that they wanted, and you don't want to accept second best. So in terms of how you proceed with the quarterback position, there's other options. You could look at Hendon Hooker. You could look at maybe exploring a Trey Lance type of trade. You could do a lot of things, or you could stand pat. But you don't just draft a quarterback just to draft quarterback. It has to be selective. You don't settle just, that's the guy we wanted. You're trying to get the quarterback that you like for your system, and Bryce Young was that guy. And Bryce Young, because of the win over the Colts, is unavailable for them.
For you, in that sense, then you'd be surprised if they took C.J. Stroud at 2.
I would be very surprised if they picked him.
So this is fun. This is really fun for everybody that's had nothing to do for the last couple of weeks, but think about what might happen next Thursday evening when it comes down. So much of the value then of the second pick has to do with whoever you're dealing with and what they're willing to sort of give up. With the change, with DeMeco Ryans now, with the defensive identity that this team wants to be, how much value does the second pick have to the organization when it comes to the defensive players that are there if they're not going to go quarterback? And again, I understand that that's a complicated question, because if someone overwhelms you with an offer for the second pick, you're going to sort of take that. But there are a couple of difference makers that in any other year where there isn't this crazy sort of four-headed quarterback monster in the room, would be viable second overall picks in terms of defensive players.
Right. I think if you're the Texans, that second overall, if you stand pat, then you could turn the card in with Will Anderson, who's a really clean prospect. They made it a priority after talking with him at the scouting combine to bring him in as one of their first visits, the 30 visits that they have. And they wanted to meet with Will, who's visiting Seahawks today, and also visiting the Lions. He's only had 3 visits. And Seattle wanted to get him in there. And it's interesting for Seattle to do that, just thinking about, well, what if they were trading? What if they don't trade? What if the Texans trade out at 2 and Will Anderson slides a little bit? So I think Seattle, that was smart of them to meet with him. And, Tyree Wilson's another player that's of consideration for the Texans at 2. So there's a lot of scenarios where they don't draft a quarterback. And that's because of Bryce Young going to the Panthers. When that became really solidified that Frank Reich and everyone was on board with going with Bryce Young instead of C.J. Stroud. It really changed the draft. And now there's the fallout from that decision, from that status that he's about to have as a top overall pick. And everybody else has to get in line.
Aaron Wilson with us, taking some time with us here on The Fan. When you look at General Manager Nick Caserio, the last two drafts, no fear on his face in terms of making trades, stepping away from what they could do at pick 2, even if they stand pat at 2, 12 picks in their arsenal right now, including that number 2 overall pick. How much movement do you expect in terms of their overall trade market outside of 2, and how many of those 12 picks they currently have do you think they actually use this year?
I think he'll probably wind up with less than the picks that he has now. I think that what he'll wind up doing is using some of those picks to move up and maneuver within the draft as they're on the clock or before to get players, and specifically targeted players that he'll get because he's got the draft pick ammunition to go and get those players. And I think that's where he's in a really advantageous spot, and this draft will work well for him. It is not a great draft, but there is a volume of players that are, I think it lacks great players, but it has a lot of good players. And that will work for their roster, which needs a lot of work still.
Not to mention the fact that you've got future firsts from Cleveland coming in the next couple of years, which I think gives this organization a little bit of an opportunity to sort of sit back and do the right thing as opposed to what is the immediate thing. But that comes back to the quarterback question. So Bryce Young, the clear number 1, he's going to be off the board. Quarterback may not be in play this year. I don't like dealing with hypotheticals, but that's kind of what we have to do with this silly sort of season of the year. What is the ideal long-term prospect for the Texans at quarterback with Young off the board?
I mean, I don't know how ideal it is. I like Hendon Hooker. I think he would have been a first-round pick, if not for the ACL. You have something of a redshirt year. I don't think it's a bad fallback scenario for the Texans. So you have Will Levis. Levis is someone that doesn't have great tape, has some footwork issues. I think personality is fine. He's got a lot of tools. The upside's there, but he's something of a project. Anthony Richardson, someone that you got to work on his accuracy. He did have a lot of incompletions that were caused by drop passes. Elite athlete. It's just my opinion. I think he'd be great at number 2 overall. But they have not. Normally you draft a player, you have him in for a visit, you have a workout with him. They've done neither. They did Zoom with Richardson. I've heard of no interest in Richardson. And so I've checked on that multiple times to see if something's going to happen late. It just hasn't materialized. Did a trip with Stroud, did a trip with Young, a trip with Levis. Really early visit with Hooker, like Will Anderson.
Yeah.
And I'm told he'll be ready by August to throw. And I don't know how much practice it can do. I'm sure he's not ready for contact, that soon after the ACL. But injured in November, outlook is good. A little older than you would like, but really good athlete, really good person from everything I've been told, and accurate thrower that was very productive for the balls. I like him a lot. I think that's a decent scenario for them. And you have Davis Mills and Case Keenum hold down the fort until you feel like Hooker's ready to play football, and maybe that's your quarterback. And, like Russell Wilson was a 3rd-round pick. Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. Not everybody has to be a high draft pick to be a successful quarterback. They did, though, fine with Davis Mills in the 3rd round. Basically, you drafted a career backup. That's the honest assessment for Davis. But, yeah, I think that's a decent scenario for them.
Yeah, I mean, so many different things at play, and obviously you've got at least long-term sort of projected for with the draft capital, a couple of, if not one, if 2 quarterbacks that may even rank higher or rate higher than many in this draft class coming up in the 2024 draft, Aaron. And so much of the reaction here in Indianapolis has to do with the fact that you take the temperature of the fan base, which obviously even sort of mirrors now the temperature inside the Colts organization with there's just been too many years of failed experiments at quarterback. And so it's the least protected secret in the NFL that the Colts are going to draft a quarterback. If they don't draft a quarterback, the franchise might implode on itself and there'll be a black hole type situation because
the Colts are fine. I mean,
right.
The Colts, I don't know why there's so much anxiety because there are going to be plenty of quarterbacks left for them.
Totally.
They should, Chris Bauer knows what he's doing, Ed Dodds and all those guys. They will do a great job if they just let the board come to them. just let it unfold. They don't have to move.
And that's kind of what we're seeing this week, right?
There's
in the way that people are talking.
There's a maximum of 3 quarterbacks that could be off the board before their pick. Okay. If all 3, let's say, if it did go that way, and I don't think it will, let's say even if the picks are traded. So let's say Stroud's gone, Richardson's gone, and Bryce is gone. Well, Levis is still there.
Yeah.
But they're probably going to be luckier than that, where there's one of those other higher-rated quarterbacks, in my opinion, like Richardson or Stroud, is still around at 4.
Right. And
so, yeah, if I'm Chris Ballard, I basically like keep my. I'll listen to this, wants to call me and say, hey, we're trying to bail out, maybe like Arizona, but I just wouldn't do it. I think he's got some good draft picks. They went through a miserable year to get to pick this high. So you can have a good quarterback for the future to go with Jonathan Taylor in a strong backfield. Do that. But, yeah, I'm sure he's drafting a quarterback. I'd be shocked if Chris Ballard doesn't draft a quarterback, and he'll have the opportunity to do that. And there's nothing wrong with betting on the upside with Levis or Richardson or Stroud for that matter. I think they're all pretty good prospects. They're just not great. There's not a great quarterback draft. There's no Joe Burrow. There's no Justin Herbert. There's nothing like that. There's no Trevor Lawrence even. And remember, it took Trevor a couple years to be good. I think they're fine. It's just a matter of, might this be frustrating for, say, a Jim Irsay because these quarterbacks are, not surefire? Sure. There's nothing certain, though. No, I think he understands that. I mean, it's a difficult draft because the demand doesn't meet the supply.
Right. And I think, but the Colts are in a position where even when it's not great, they're going to have to probably swing and try and get it right with this particular quarterback. And my question kind of has to do with, from a Houston standpoint, in this building the roster back up, how different the feel of need is to get quarterback right is in Houston right now, given the way that it is here at Indianapolis, and how that makes their approach to the draft so differently between the two franchises.
As far as in the building or the fans?
Well, I mean, it should be the building, right? The building drives what it's going on. But I do think that a little bit of apathy here in Indianapolis certainly influences the urgency, especially when you have an owner here in Indianapolis that's as tied into understanding and taking the temperature of the fan base. But I'm curious how different it is in Houston.
There's a lot of apathy here that they're trying to work on that's improving since D'Amico Ryans was hired. They'd like to keep that momentum going by winning enough to keep the fans engaged, and they'd like to create excitement with their draft. They're hoping that this will be something of a, let's build the momentum. We've got the coach. Let's get some exciting players, and let's keep selling tickets and getting people to say positive things about the team, because there really are genuinely positive things going on. And that's where they're at as a building. Ideally, yes, you have a quarterback that you can get behind. But if it's not there, you can't let fans and marketing concerns drive your football decisions. I think they've never been a team that interfered or said, hey, you have to draft this player because we're asking some tickets. Now, they have a lot of empty seats or seats being filled by the opposition. The Eagles fans took over for that Thursday night game. That happened for the Chiefs game. And it's very notable. Like, you can hear, you probably covered it, Chiefs game where they say home of the Chiefs instead of home of the Brave. You could hear it so loud at NRG and here in Houston, Texas. And the Eagles fans, they took over. They were loud. They were all unruly sometimes. They were all over the place. And it was like an Eagles home game. And you can buy tickets for $20. That's got to stop. They got to fix that. And it's been going that way for a couple of years now. So, yes, you need to get people interested. You got to be relevant. Relevant would be getting a quarterback, a good quarterback. But if it's the wrong quarterback or he doesn't fit or your football people don't want him, well, then you make a mistake. And you're better off just building your defense right away and then seeing what you can do to try to get your quarterback later. But I just think you cannot force certain positions. You can try to do some things with. Maybe a guy can play a different position. Talking about you're moving a defensive end to a linebacker or vice versa. In this case, it's the top spot. You just can't get it wrong. And if you don't feel good about it, then you shouldn't force the issue.
Aaron, when you look at from afar, from our perspective, right? I'm not covering the Texans on a daily basis. Just the way that I see the national media cover them, and just my bias around Houston is caught up still in the Bill O'Brien era with how there were some boneheaded decisions made, whether it was just trading DeAndre Hopkins, just the fallout from that, and obviously you couldn't help the off the field stuff as much, but there was the contract dispute before that with Deshaun Watson. So I take that into account, and I look at the Texans, I'm like, okay, still the same ownership group in the McNairs. Can I really trust them to make the right decisions? But then when I look at a general manager like Nick Caserio, who I think is a fresh start for them, like he's cooking something nice to this point. He's trying to lay foundations now in year 3. Is that a bad perception to have about the franchise, that, well, they're ultimately going to make the wrong decisions? And is that still felt that way amongst the fan base, or is that just a national bias not being there on a day-to-day basis?
I think a little bit of both. But I also would say that, for those that aren't in the building, it's a lot more functional and better than people realize. It's just a matter of, and the locker room is very good. The players, the way they get along, the camaraderie, that's actually, even last year when they were losing, was very good. And even people thought, oh, Brandon Cooks is upset, he wants to be traded. The players still like Brandon, and Brandon got along well with everybody and worked well. That wasn't a problem. Players stick together. And, his issue with the team is separate. He was ultimately traded to the Cowboys. What I think about the team is that they're improving, they're going in the right direction. And the Bill O'Brien era, some of those mistakes in the past, they're not making those same mistakes. They are getting value for trades. It took some patience and some great lawyering by Rusty Hardin, where Deshaun wasn't indicted by 2 grand juries. That allowed them to make the trade. They allowed David Mulugheta to set up something of a bidding war with pre-qualifying teams that could be involved in the trade scenario. And I thought Nick Caserio did a good job of not being ultra controlling about it, just kind of letting it play out. And he got great value for the trade, and that's why they're in this better position. It's taken him a while, but he's gotten the salary cap in shape. And I thought their free agency was a little, it's solid. It's not anything that people should get very excited about, but it was solid this year when they had some money to spend, and it was more of a volume approach. I think it's getting better here. It's just a matter of, much longer does it take? Is 2024 really the year that they can contend in the division? I don't think it's very good. Maybe if they have a quarterback, I think that the defense is going to get in shape under D'Amico, but we're going to find out. Ultimately, the time will tell the truth about this organization. But the vibe I have and what I hear from people inside and outside of the building is, things are better.
Aaron, we'll leave you with this one. If you had to judge the vibe, you talk so much about value, about getting the most out of this draft next week. What ultimately right now would you say is the most likely outcome to the first round and the Houston Texans?
Probably getting a edge rusher, Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson. Perhaps at 12, getting Jackson Smith-Njigba and, getting a wide receiver 1. And then maybe at 33, whether it's at 33 or maybe they're moving, maybe you'd have to move up for him a little bit if you want Hendon Hooker. That's one scenario that I think is viable for the Texans.
Yeah, that would be a heck of a haul for the Texans. Appreciate your insight, Aaron. Learned a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Darren Wilson from down in Houston. Okay, Jimmy. A lot to go on from there. I asked the question and I framed it. It took a long time to get to where I was going with it, and I think he kind of made my point for me in talking about the Colts sort of standing pat, and then there would be a quarterback that would fall sort of to them. But the desperation of the Colts to get a quarterback, to me, seems like it's higher than the desperation that Houston has in his mind to get a quarterback. I love the idea of waiting for Hendon Hooker. I mean, if you think that he rates out and they have the draft capital to do it, even if they move back from 2, they've got enough other picks that if they feel like they want to move up and get him later in the first round, they've got way more wiggle room to make that scenario happen, to where Nick Caserio can sit there and be like, I can make my dream probably come true because I've got enough in my wallet to shop with in this one. But I do find it really interesting that it's like, the Texans wouldn't stretch for a quarterback they don't believe in at 2, but the Colts will be fine waiting at 4 for a good, not great quarterback that they need and have obviously identified needs to happen. It just sort of shows you're at 2 different stages of franchise operation in terms of what you absolutely have to get things moving.
His evaluation, though, is where I fear the Colts' mindset is when you look at just Richardson and Levis. Take Stroud off the board for a second for two reasons. One, he flat out
put Stroud on the board because the Texans have obviously said if it's not Bryce Young, then we don't want any of these three guys that people are fighting for in the top.
Correct. What I'm saying is, and what I took away from what he was saying was not only that, but that I think they trade back. I think that someone's going to value Stroud as highly as I think all three of us do in this room, and they're going to trade up and give them something that they can't refuse. And then that gives them even more weapons or arsenal or draft capital if they really want Hendon Hooker to go get him. Why I say take Stroud off the board for a second is that I'm envisioning a world where somebody's trading up to 2 and we're back to square one, which is Levis or Richardson. What do you do at 3? Do you play the waiting game like he said they should do, or do you trade up and ensure you get your guy? I think the Colts are in the former of that. I think they evaluate Richardson and Levis the same. Hell, maybe they have Levis ahead of him. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know that. Bauer's not going to tell us that. But if that's the way they have it, I don't see a path of cheers for Colts fans because a draft day trade was made in the first round. I just don't see it.
I don't see Houston trading down because they just have such a depletion of talent on that roster that they need a Will Anderson. They need an edge rusher who has Hall of Fame upside, who's going to be a Pro Bowler probably a couple of times before the end of his career and potentially an All-Pro. That's just, to me, what I feel like with Houston, and especially after hearing Aaron Wilson talk there.
Well, I think also, too, it's he says maybe Anderson, maybe Tyree Wilson. If it's Tyree Wilson is who they like, and they know that Will Anderson's going to be the first edge rusher off the board, then there's no sense in you keeping the second pick.
Correct.
You give it to someone who wants a quarterback, allow Arizona to have their pick of the defensive litter. If all of a sudden now they're like, oh, we get Will Anderson, which is we kind of thought was going to be here anyway in this quarterback-centric sort of draft. But it depends on who you trade back with. Because if you're Houston and you trade with Las Vegas at 7, I mean, I don't see Seattle wanting to go up to get a quarterback. I don't see Detroit, wild card there for the Lions. But they did some good things last year with Jared Goff, and I think they could build around him at 6 instead of feeling like they need to give up assets to go to them. So then you're more talking about this Atlanta at 8 or other crazier packages that are coming from behind. But the farther back you move, you accumulate more draft capital wealth if you're Houston, which you already have a ton of, but then you lose the right to either Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson, who it kind of sounds like. So I can sort of see both sides here.
Yeah.
I'm okay with saying we're not going to rush the quarterback thing. We're okay with Davis Mills for now. We're okay on gambling on a redshirt year for a Hendon Hooker or utilizing all this draft capital to get back into the Caleb Williams sweepstakes in 2024 or whatever it might be.
Let Davis Mills cook and you'll be fine. You'll get the 4 wins next year and you'll be the number 1 overall
But
pick.
there is risk associated with if you're trying to get best talent available.
Yeah.
Of giving up so many spaces that you don't get. Because, again, if we're just going by just talent, you want one of those edge rushers. Like, what are the most valuable positions in the game? And you've got at least one that's staring you in the face that many have said is one of the highest-rated edge rushers to come out.
Right.
It's an interesting spot. Like, he was so adamant on it was Bryce Young or bust that there's no chance they're taking a quarterback at 2. I mean, all of the conversation. I mean, it's not just that's a full raging fire right now. Like,
there was no hesitation whatsoever.
If a quarterback is drafted at 2, it sounds like, according to Aaron, it's going to be by another team. Yep. Which means when you have the 2nd and the 12th overall pick, and you have 12 picks in this draft, not to mention Cleveland's first-round pick next year, and you know you're not going to get a quarterback, do you even really need to accumulate assets, or you just sit there at 2 and say, give me Will Anderson? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh boy, this draft is getting pretty interesting in terms of the fact that now C.J. Stroud's dangling there at 3, and there will be allegedly 6 teams or more that are willing to work up to do that. And we're back to the original scenario, only this time the stakes or the payoff is even higher for whoever bids the highest to get that 3rd overall pick.
And then the question becomes...
I mean, I love C.J. Stroud. I don't know why.
Like if I was Houston, I would take him, just to be clear.
Yeah,
like, I think that my whole conversation about... Are they doing dumb things again in Houston? Like, or is this a new regime? And my whole thing was based on the fact that you're doing something dumb right now in not taking Stroud. That being said, do I think with Stroud that the Texans are winning the South next year? No. So by that logic, maybe your thought if you're a Texans fan is, I'll wait till next year, one more bad season. We don't care anyway. We get the Astros. We're fine. And you'll go have Caleb Williams next year. I mean, I don't know. I would take Stroud at 2. But
it sounds like Houston's not going to be the one doing it.
Yeah.
I'd like to also make this point again. Stroud and Watson, they share the same representation.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times, and I understand that there was a ton of bad blood between upper management, ownership, and Deshaun Watson's agent and how that all went down. But at the end of the day, what is an agent tasked with doing? Getting each individual client the most money possible. And so if CJ Stroud is represented by an agent, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what the name of the agent is. I apologize for that. But if he is so dead set on negotiating in bad faith with the Texans out of spite for a different client, this would be different than Deshaun Watson's up for a new contract in 4 years, and the Texans want to have a reunion with them. That's a different situation for the agent, but I just can't see you negotiating in bad faith or an organization not being willing to go back to the table with someone no matter how it ended when it's dealing with a separate. That's just bad business for whoever is the one not willing to make that happen.
Yeah, I get that there's, to Eddie's point, like I understand there's maybe some animosity or some bad blood still there, but that's not enough.
I'm sure there is.
That's not enough to not
draft
a player that you think is generational.
But also the fact that on his combine interview, he said that he looks up to Deshaun Watson. So with the combination of them sharing the same agent, how often have these two chatted about the Houston Texans with the real possibility that he could be there at 2? And if he talks to Deshaun and Deshaun tells him, hey, this, and this, he goes, I don't want to play here. He tells the agent, hey, I don't want to play here. Then the agent realized I
don't want to play in Houston. To be clear, like I wouldn't want to play in Houston if I'm CJ Stroud for a lot of different reasons. I don't trust the organization. Like I don't care what they're building there right now. They've done enough in my lifetime to where it's like, they're a middling franchise that, granted, and it's wild. I sit here today as a Chiefs fan, like they are a half of football. If you just encapsulate one half of football, they're in an AFC championship game, and who knows how things shake out differently before they blow that lead to Kansas City. Like I've just seen enough missteps and poor decision making, even with all Nick Caserio's trying to do to rebuild it. And look, he hit on Dameon Pierce last year. Like they're doing their best to try to rebuild the franchise. That would still be too much for me, even without Deshaun Watson in my ear, if that is the case.
I mean, Caserio and D'Amico Ryans sitting across the table from any player that's interested in perhaps coming there, I would like to think can overcome in a league that turns over as quickly as possible. I mean, think about what the Jaguars overcame in a half season worth of Urban Meyer to what they became last season in making that playoff run. I mean, this is the one league of all professional sports leagues where you can snap your fingers and in 12 months' time you can go from being a laughing stock to being a contender.
Yeah.
And so I just don't. I think everybody is doing themselves a disservice if you're holding on to past reputations, past grudges, when there aren't the same exact people that are sort of involved in it. And we've gotten sort of away from it, but it doesn't even sound like it's the relationships. It's just the tape. It's just the evaluation that if they were really hoping that they could land the number 1 overall pick, and that final week of the season ended up hurting them in their quest to be the number 1 overall pick and take Bryce Young and really kickstart this rebuild down there. And with Carolina now saying that they're likely to take Bryce Young, at least behind the scenes, probably the worst kept secret at this point in time in the draft leading up to next week. I'm with you. I'm just kind of stunned that we're not seeing in what I thought was a draft of 2 number 1 caliber quarterbacks and then 2 guys that have this upside that other teams will reach for, that when you're still in the number 2 slot, you wouldn't take that number 2 quarterback.
I would have been happy with either one, and that's the way I posed that question. So for Aaron's pushback to me, Texas never saw it that way. It was young or nothing. Like it's almost like it was smushed Stroud, Levis, and Richardson in the same category. Yeah. Like I've had separation between like Young and Stroud, maybe 1A and 1B, and then you go to Richardson and Levis. That conversation is like, no, the Texans view it as it was Young, and then those other 3 guys aren't worth first-round evaluation. Hendon Hooker might be worth a flyer.
I mean, if I'm listening to that interview right now and I'm running the Colts organization, 2/3 of 5th, Arizona, and we'll swap picks from 3 to 4. Like, let's have this conversation right now. I mean, I'm serious. I'm dead. I know that Arizona has to wait until the draft. They should wait until the draft. We've talked about this so much, but I would accelerate. I would accelerate having a phone call. I think you now have a quarterback potentially on the board at 3 that is far more enticing than I would wait at 4. If he's going to go at 2, then wait at 4 and figure it out. But if you know he's now going to be there at 3 or potentially could be there at 3 if they don't move out of that pick, Because again, if you need difference makers in that building, trading back for Houston doesn't necessarily make that happen. You can still get a difference maker, but it just appears now that their difference maker is not going to be a signal caller.
Yeah, it's just that whole thing was a wild change of my perspective of where things are at.
100%.
I will say, though, and I want to get your and Eddie's thoughts on this too, if you asked me point blank today, and I hope I'm wrong, I do, because I like the idea of them being in control of their own destiny, regardless of how the board falls. If you ask me today what I think happens, I think they stay at 4. That's ultimately what I think happens. Not what I would do, what I think will happen. I think the Colts stay at 4.
I think they would stay at 4 if 1 and 2 draft picks were guaranteed to be quarterbacks. And now I'm not as sure, which I think does change how we're going to approach these next 8 days leading up to the draft. We'll talk more about that and more coming up. Running out of showtime here as that interview made things very fascinating here in Indianapolis. With Jimmy Cook, I'm Will Haskett. This is the Fan Midday Show. My 12-year-old's gotten into classic rock, and it's awesome. I mean, awesome. I mean, every day discovering of a new song. This was on, we were going to soccer the other day, and Joan Jett was on, and I was like, he goes, oh, I think I've heard this song. And I'm like, every day he discovers like just an absolute classic banger. It's been awesome. That's Jimmy Cook. I'm Will Haskett. This is the Fan Midday Show. We're still reacting to.
Do you have a faux hawk yet?
No faux hawks.
Right.
I had, describe faux hawk. I mean, that's the rage. I used to have one. I grew my hair out a little bit. Now it's kind of swooped over a little bit. But I mean, you could have
it
a
looks
faux
like
hawk
a mohawk, but you haven't fully shaved your head.
Right.
That is what I view as a faux hawk, I guess.
But so it has to have a real hawk to it.
Maybe not like aggressive, like 30-foot wave, but yeah, it's clear what he's trying to do there. You can easily identify it.
But I mean, you know the style where you just kind of you smush the hair up and you have a little bit in the front. I mean, I feel like that's the standard now.
Yeah.
For everybody. So you could call it the faux hawk, but no, not the full mohawk standpoint. I mean, we just talked through the whole break. Sadly, those of you driving around didn't get to hear all of that because we're still sort of reacting to this weird draft class, and Eddie was nodding along when I said we could almost arrive at a place where we were last year, where I don't think there was the same level of anticipation of what might happen in last year's draft. And then we got to it, and it was just rank and file down the list. Guys just kind of teams just sort of took players, and there wasn't like the splashy move, like who's going to move up, who's going to do crazy things. And we've built this run up because of this no sure thing group of quarterbacks with quarterback needy teams at or near the top, as if there's going to be massive sort of movement. And we began this show talking about the lack of a understanding as to why all of a sudden we could be saying that the second quarterback's going to be available at 4. And now here I am at the end of the day with different conversations being like, well, you know what? It may be more plausible than outlandish, Jimmy, at this point in time, because we've seen drafts never deliver in the way that we thought teams would be crazy and make some sort of moves. And this whole flux of Houston maybe not going quarterback, it's going to be a fascinating final week. And I just would like to take a 8-day nap and wake up on Thursday and be done with it.
There's an important differentiator from last year's draft and this year's draft that I feel like needs to be addressed or either reassessed, because I've heard that all the time. And I've heard Eddie mention that. Every year, quarterback or not, there's always talk there's going to be movement to trade up, whether it's to get a difference maker on the defensive end, whether it's to get a playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. That's every year. Every year the speculation is this is going to be the year there's trades. And then every now and again, like last year, you get a year where it's nothing. It's just standard status quo. That's all it was. Looking back, though, at where the quarterbacks are last year, I want to ask, I trust Eddie will get it right. I don't know if you will. So I want to ask you first. Do you know the second quarterback that went last year?
Okay, so it was the fall all the way to, was it not until Malik Willis went in the third round? No, Ritter went. No, Ritter went after Willis, right? So was it Willis to Tennessee in the third round? Is that?
Assuming I haven't pressed the skip button incorrectly, which I've not, it was Kenny Pickett.
16th, right, overall.
Desmond Ritter and Malik Willis. I'm not trying
I thought
to be...
Ritter free fell too, because remember there was a lot of smoke about the Colts maybe looking at Ritter's second round with
they were 12 picks apart, to be clear. They were both in the third round. They both kind of fell.
Okay, so Ritter did go before Willis.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, maybe I'm being Eddie. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because you brought this point up the other day, and I haven't dove into looking the Wayback Machine to figure out where the pieces were. I don't remember myself viewing Pickett, Ritter, or Willis as somebody I would take
Never.
in the top 10.
No. No, it was a very bad quarterback class.
It was an awful quarterback class. To the point, maybe this is an unpopular opinion, I think Kenny Pickett stinks. If I'm a Steelers fan, I'm not happy about the outlook that I have as a franchise because Kenny Pickett's under center. And I say all that to say that...
Oh, come on.
That's at the J Cook, to everybody listening in Pittsburgh, at the J Cook.
Feel free. Get in the mentions. I say all that because I'm willing to entertain the idea that Colts fans, if they get Will Levis, or Colts fans, they get Anthony Richardson, should have the same level of optimism as a Steelers fan probably did last year when they get Kenny Pickett, which is to say, not a lot. We have a quarterback, but is he really going to be a flashy toy? I'm willing to hear that argument. I'm not willing to hear that Stroud or Young, as the headliners of this class, deserve the same grouping right now as Pickett, Ritter, and Willis did last year.
No.
And I just want to make sure that that's not the conversation that's...
Look, we have history on our side to show that even when quarterbacks are drafted high, that they're not always guaranteed to pan out. We've seen guys move up. Mitch Trubisky's all the way back to the last time we had quarterbacks go 1, 2, and 3. We had 1, 2, and 3 just a couple of years ago, and then the last time it happened was the 90s, and Achilles Smith was the number 3 quarterback off the board in Cincinnati, and that did not work out. And that crashed and burned rather quickly in the NFL as well. So I have said, I think if you just played the percentages, that 2 out of the 4 of these quarterbacks we're talking about will be second contract max sort of guys. Let's just play the law of averages. Well, if you look at last year's class, Pickett was serviceable for Pittsburgh in his rookie year and may still develop into a high floor, low ceiling sort of starter, which Pittsburgh, from a historical standpoint, can live with. Ben Roethlisberger was great, Hall of Fame quarterback, but he also was, I would say, coming out of college, probably a high floor, and his ceiling maybe ended up being a little bit higher than maybe even people expected, but he was going to get you gritty. He was perfect for Pittsburgh. And in many ways, Pickett kind of fits what that is. Ritter and Willis were flyers, and because they were flyers, they ended up falling. Like, teams just were like, we're not going to know. And if you pay attention to some of the stuff this week, there's rumors that Tennessee might want to go up and get one of these quarterbacks, which means, well, that 1 year didn't work out. And now today, C.J. Stroud visiting Atlanta, which, again, any team in the top 10 is probably going to do their homework. But Desmond Ritter can't exactly be looking at these visits and thinking to himself, wow, that's a real vote of confidence that my organization's looking at a guy that might now be available if their teams want to move up. So back to my point, like, even if 2 of the 4 work out, they're going to work out at I would think, a long-term sort of place. And so now you have to say, do you believe in the high ceiling and hope that we catch that lottery ticket, or do you believe in what you perceive to be a high floor and that you'll get a little bit of a boost? And that's sort of the crapshoot right now. But it's weird. It's like people say, is there a Patrick Mahomes in this draft class? Well, was there a Patrick Mahomes in Patrick Mahomes' draft class in terms of how we were talking about them coming out of college? No, we weren't talking about him in that way. So, again, 2 out of 4 make it.
Right.
2 out of the 4 don't. But you have to be in position to take one of those guys. And if the market this year is setting that 2 or 3 of them are going to go in the top 4 picks, then you got to be there to play ball. And last year, the market set that those guys weren't going to be there.
Correct.
Which means people smarter than you, me, and everybody else are looking at these guys and rating them as prospects and saying they are worth being drafted in this position. And if you're the Colts and you've gone down the recycled QB road too many times, then you're going to have to take one of them. And it feels as if, by the news today and how it's sort of trickling out through national conversation, that your path to getting one of those guys, if you are rating them higher, is a little bit easier than maybe it was when we began this week.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all in terms of the assessment of where things were at last year compared to this year. I guess the point that I'm trying to convey to the audience, or maybe to those that are like, oh, we're, like you mentioned earlier, like stuff is being made up, or the smoke is getting bigger in terms of visibility and confusion for where this draft is actually going to go. Like, they're, at least from a scouting perspective, scouts are not always right. They're wrong all the time. But there is, at least from a scouting perspective, this is a draft with 4 potential QBs, of which, to your point, 2 might be able to be difference makers for a franchise. I don't disagree with that. But the idea that, like, quarterbacks in this draft are just getting this attention solely because they're quarterbacks, I think there is a high level of value in terms of what each of these QBs could become. Can they make it in whatever system they end up in? So what happened with Mahomes, like you mentioned, now, like, people chastised the Chiefs for taking Patrick Mahomes, and they had Alex Smith and had just made the playoffs consecutive seasons with him there. The idea they would go and get a young quarterback and take a chance like that. But he ended up in a perfect system in Kansas City, and he also ended up to be a generational talent. Those two have to mesh. So often they don't. That's why it took a second year for Trevor Lawrence, because he was in a bad system with Urban Meyer.
Right.
You're right. You have to have the lottery ticket to get there. My biggest issue, though, is that I feel like there is some separation in this class, and I don't agree with the ideology that Levis and Richardson are both probably about the
100%
same.
agree.
And I know you agree with that as well. So let's stand pat at 4. I don't agree with that at all.
I don't agree with it either. I agree with the unfortunate reality that if those first 2 quarterbacks are gone, that you still have to roll the dice on whichever one of the remaining 2 prospects you feel gives yourself the best chance at hitting that lottery ticket long term.
I wouldn't do it for Levis, though.
I understand you would. I understand you wouldn't, and that's a different debate.
It is. It's a whole different can of worms.
For a different reality. But the reality that we seem to be existing in right now is one where C.J. Stroud is plausible for the Colts.
Yeah.
Way more plausible than we would have thought a couple of weeks ago, when it's like these guys are going 1-2. It's going to be Young and Stroud 1 and 2. You don't have a dance partner at 2. You're never going to be able to trade with the Texans, which means the opportunity of you ever going to get one of those top 2 guys was non-existent if you were a Colts fan. And maybe even the Colts brass may have thought it if you're like, yeah, well, Houston's got to take care of this quarterback situation, right? So we're going to get one of these guys. And I'd always thought that maybe there was a crazy outside play if Richardson's numbers wowed so many that he went in that 1 or 2 range, and then Stroud sort of fell. But it seems like there is significant momentum now behind the idea that C.J. Stroud will be available perhaps later than 2. Whereas if you'd asked me a week ago, I said 100% he's going in the top 2 picks. And now I'm not so sure.
And I'm very excited about that if I'm a Colts fan. I am.
Absolutely excited.
The question, though, again, remains, and maybe this isn't fair, but it needs to be brought up. Chris Ballard, when asked about the idea of trading up to 1, I understand that 1 and 3 are vastly different spots, but the idea of trading up at 1 was, we don't feel that we necessarily need to make a jump to get the guy that we want. We feel like that, that doesn't have to, like, he pointed to the media saying he had to do it, which I was one of those people. Go up to 1, have your choice of Young or Stroud, and take all this stress off the plate. Who cares about the asset? Just go get one of them. He said, I don't feel we have to do that. Did he say that because he didn't like the asking price? Or did he say it because he doesn't see the massive separation between Stroud, Richardson, and Levis? Because if it's the latter, he's not going to move up to go get CJ Stroud. He's not.
Yeah. I read it a lot to be, I don't like the price to 1, and we're never going to be able to do business at 2.
You think it's more price than talent evaluation?
Just look at the price.
I'm just asking you.
Look at the price paid to get to
enormous.
number 1.
Yeah. I'm not.
So I think it had a lot to do with price. In order to match that price, you have to think that Bryce Young is the chosen one for your future. You have to have the same grade on him that you would have had on a Burrow, an Andrew Luck, surefire top overall pick type quarterbacks that were can't miss prospects. I think that's the only way that happens. And we've talked about this. I don't think you have that sure of a grade on any of these 4 guys.
I would agree.
I think you have a much better chance of hitting that with a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. Having said all of that, I would like to think that the price was too high to go to that spot when there was no guarantees. And then in that vein, be like, we're happy with where we are, because then the rest of it is trickling down in all the scenarios that we just talked about. I think that there's a new scenario at play that maybe we weren't fully thinking about. And I know that it's Chris Ballard's job to anticipate every sort of scenario that's going on there. But they play the Texans twice a year. And they know Davis Mills. And when they got the 2nd overall pick, if they're over there on West 56th Street saying right now, we kind of thought they wouldn't draft a quarterback all along. The board fell exactly the way we wanted it. Yep. And we always knew that the Texans weren't interested in a quarterback.
Ready for that liner on Friday.
It's like, no,
Friday morning.
It can be okay for news and developments or even rumors to influence our opinions as much as it influences actions over there. Like, they're in an information business too. They want to know what's going on behind the scenes of some of these guys picking in front of them. And I think over the last couple of days, especially now with what we've done, and maybe Aaron Wilson's 100% wrong, but that interview at the top of the hour has certainly shifted a little bit of what I expect to see play out next Thursday when the draft kicks off.
Well, because it's a different perspective, right? It's boots on the ground. It's somebody that's actually there day to day.
He said he's talking to a ton of different people and asking questions.
And I believe that. He's covered the Texans for a good amount of time now. It's just...
And who's motivated to turn this narrative around? Like, if next week the Texans stay at 2 and draft CJ Stroud, what was the benefit of creating this environment where they were not going to take a quarterback?
Trying to put a nice lure online and hope that someone takes the bait.
Someone really wants to spend
and throw some offer you can't turn down.
Puts a Carolina Panthers offer on the table to move up to number 2. I mean,
if I'm the Texans and I get anything that involves multiple picks, including what would be a pick swap, right? First rounders this year and then an additional first rounder next year with a 2nd or a 3rd. If you get an offer like that.
But like we talked about, though,
that'd be the reason.
But like we talked about, though, they need talent, and especially defensive talent. Yeah. And if they move down too far, they take themselves out of the running to get probably 2 or 3 of the guaranteed defensive studs in this class, and they have the 12th pick too. Like, I don't know how motivated they are to accumulate even more draft capital. They need bodies. If anything, they're moving up, not down.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I also look at them and they see where they're at in a rebuild process. And he brought up the point, is 2024 really when they contend in the division? I don't think so. I'd bump it up another 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe you think to yourself, okay, we get generational talent here with Will Anderson, but we could also get a couple more first-round picks or another first-round pick next year to be able to really crush it in 2024.
I don't know what the odds are on Will Anderson going number 2 in the draft next week, but it might be worth a $5 wager. Speaking of wagers, Eddie and Jimmy going to make their picks coming up here in the last segment. And also, there was a massive win yesterday in college athletics involving an Indiana team. Got to give them some love. That coming up here on The Fan. Getting out of here on a Wednesday, Fan Midday Show. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you are just as confused and maybe even more excited about what the Colts might do in the draft coming up next week after what we discovered on the show today with Jimmy Cook. I'm Will Haskett. Hey, quick shout out to the Indiana State baseball team. Mitch Hanna's crew yesterday taking it to Vanderbilt 10-2 in a midweek game, a one-off for the Sycamores. Their first win over a ranked opponent since 2021. Vanderbilt entered the game 4th in the nation. All 9 Sycamores hit safely in the game. 10-2 was the final. Congratulations to ISU. They're ranked in the top 25, by the way. They're number 22 in the country, so it's not a huge shock to go down there, but it was the highest ranked opponent they had ever beaten in their history, so they continue coming. Those midweek games are always interesting. You don't get maybe the number one starter like you would see on a Friday in a series in the SEC, so it's not as if you're getting the absolute best, but those big SEC teams don't want to go losing on a Tuesday night, and that's exactly what happened last night. So shout out to the Sycamores for getting it done last night down in Nashville.
Never going to hear me complain about giving shout-outs to local talent. I understand, as you kind of joked a little bit, but in all seriousness, give it a tip of the cap leading into the next one on this Airways in JMV. I'm sure he'll be very excited about that as well.
Yeah, well, if I had something good from Butler to talk about right now, they'd probably be doing that right now, but I got a ranked win yesterday. Speaking of wins, after that bad beat last night, I need some money making. Let's go, boys.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's Plays of the Day. Be interesting to see how Eddie looks at my MLB plays today and if he will go against, go for, or be indifferent. But we'll start first with the basketball. Going to lay the 8 tonight on the Denver Nuggets as they host the Minnesota Timberwolves. Going to take the Lakers on the money line over the Memphis Grizzlies. Going to take Jaren Jackson Jr. of the Memphis Grizzlies over 22.5 total points. Taking LeBron James over 26.5 total points. And the Champions League, going to take Man City to close things out, but tie no bet today. So if they draw in this second leg of the quarterfinal, then that is just a push. And then closing it out with baseball, taking the New York Yankees on the money line over the Los Angeles Angels, taking the Minnesota Twins on the money line over the Boston Red Sox. 3-3 yesterday, 5-5 for the week. Eddie, you've stood up.
Fun fact, LeBron James has only eclipsed 26.5 with D'Angelo Russell 4 times out of the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11 games they've played together.
It's going to be crazy when
big LeBron hammer night. This is a LeBron hammer game.
He's due.
So?
I like it. Yep.
So?
This is a big game for both teams. Lakers got to win this one and take control of the series.
What was your MLB pick? I didn't hear it.
Twins money line, Yankees money line.
Can't go against either one of those.
Don't like them, but don't hate them enough to bet against it.
No, like I don't like them.
You guys started this show wrestling, and now you're coming together in harmony with your picks today.
Steve.
Eddie, you're good?
Yeah, I need to know I need to know the facts on who's in and who's out tonight before I make any NBA bets.
Giannis listed as doubtful for the Bucks.
That's standard, though. That hasn't been a downgrade.
I know. It doesn't look good, but the Heat are getting 8 in that game. The over-under is 220.5. I think that's a grind-out game. I think the Heat just don't want to get up and down. They want to make it low-scoring. They want to get dirty from defense with the Bucks. If I parlay those two together right now, I can get plus 264 on that one. So I understand that I could be bit by Giannis, and as soon as that news comes out, it could move the line a little bit. But, man, the Heat getting 8 when I think it's going to be a somewhat low-scoring game, I kind of like that tonight, even though the Bucks need this win. Even if the Bucks win that game, I think it could come down to the last couple of possessions. 8's a lot of points.
Yeah, I tried to do that the other night with the Clippers. Didn't pan out that way. Obviously, there weren't Paul George, but there weren't a ton of injuries to have to deal with or cycle through in that regard. Miami played so much at times bad basketball in the second half that I can't do it. But I disagree with the logic.
But I mean, you're missing a couple of offensive players. I like the under though in that game. All right, we learned a lot today.
We did.
Eddie, thank you so much. Jimmy and I are gonna head out and try and start making some custom CJ Stroud Colts jerseys because the pipe dream might actually be a little bit closer than I thought when it was all said and done. We'll talk about that and more coming up. John is in next here with the ride coming up. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Get out and enjoy it. Weather's going to get bad the rest of the week. It is fantastic here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.